Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
One Piece, The Agony of Weakness, by SilverWrath. Luffy has to face an agony that he has never felt before. True weakness. Can Nami help him before he does something that they will regret for the rest of their lives? Luffy x Nami. Grateful, touched. Huge shout out to all the warlords of this channel. You know who you are. Want to stand among legends? Join the channel membership and show your support. Adios.
It was a warm and sunny afternoon in the New World. The ship of the Straw Hat Pirates, the Thousand Sunny, bobbed up and down gently as it waited patiently in the calm waves. It had been a few weeks since the Straw Hats had departed from Fishman Island and they were just becoming familiar with the strange weather in the New World. The whole crew had been on high alert watching for any signs of danger. Today, however, the crew had decided to take a short break and anchor off the coast of a small island. The island they found was barely an island at all. It was more of a group of large rocks that were sticking out of the water. In truth, the Thousand Sunny was larger than most of the rocks, but that didn't matter. The weather was warm and stable. This was the perfect place to rest. Monkey D. Luffy, the young captain of the Straw Hats, was standing on the grass lawn of his ship. He was gazing off across the sea, daydreaming about the adventures that were waiting for him and his crew. This was the greatest sea in the world, with the strongest and most powerful people in it. He wanted to prove himself by conquering all of it and becoming the king of the pirates. As Luffy stood there daydreaming, he was snapped back to reality by a loud crash. It sounded like it had come from the shore. He walked over to the railing to see what was going on. "Gah! Look what you did, Moss Head," said Sanji, the smooth-talking cook of the ship. He was on shore with a few other members of the crew. "Hey, shut up. It isn't my fault that your stupid grill is falling apart," yelled Zoro, the hot-headed swordsman. "My grill isn't the problem, it's your moss-covered brain. I don't know how you even think with that crap on your head." Sanji and Zoro began arguing and Luffy couldn't help but laugh. Apparently, Sanji was planning on cooking barbecue for dinner that day. He had enlisted Zoro to help him bring his grill onto the shore so he could cook outside. "Perfect. Sanji's barbecue is the best. I can't wait for my meat," Luffy thought as the two men on shore began attacking one another. Luffy looked around to find the rest of his crew. The first person he found was Frankie, the cyborg shipwright of the crew. He was kicked back leaning against the stairs drinking a bottle of cola. Next to him was the archaeologist of the crew, Robin. She was sitting in a lawn chair reading one of her many books. Her and Frankie were talking about something but Luffy couldn't really make it out. He shrugged and scanned the rest of the ship. The sound of music floated onto the ship from the shore where Sanji and Zoro were fighting. There was the musician, the living skeleton Brook, was playing a tune for the two men to fight to. Brook was laughing hysterically as foot met blade. Nearby, begging the two men to stop fighting, was the sniper of the crew, Usopp. His words were drowned out by Zoro and Sanji's yelling and Brook's song. Usopp yelled something about not encouraging them to fight, but it too was drowned out. Luffy noticed that Chopper, the ship's doctor, was nowhere to be seen. He's probably in the doctor's office, Luffy thought. Chopper has been talking about rearranging all of his medicine stuff for a while now. Luffy was so enthralled with observing his crew that he didn't notice the young woman standing next to him. She had finished working on the maps of Fishman's Island and been standing next to him for some time. She was leaning against the railing just watching Luffy with a smile on her face. She was waiting for her absent-minded captain to notice her, but clearly that wasn't going to happen. She sighed and slipped her fingers in between his, holding his hand gently. This caught Luffy's attention and he looked over at her, the orange-haired navigator, Nami. "I swear you are so scatterbrained, you know that?" Nami asked as she stood up and kissed Luffy on the cheek. His face turned bright red from the unexpected kiss. Nami giggled. "You didn't even know I was here." A large grin spread across Luffy's face. "Of course I did," he exclaimed, turning towards her. "Oh, and how long was I standing here?" Luffy went silent for a moment, trying to think. Nami smiled again and shook her head. "That's okay. I wanted to sneak up on you anyway. Luffy looked confused. Why? He asked innocently. Nami leaned forward and kissed Luffy on the cheek again. After a few seconds she broke away and giggled. To do that? Nami said sweetly. Luffy shook his head smiling. That wasn't a very good kiss, Nami. I want a better one than that. Nami shook her head, teasing her captain. Oh no, that's all you get for today. I am far too busy to. Her sentence was cut off by Luffy gently pressing his lips against hers. Nami slowly closed her eyes, savoring every second of this kiss. She released Luffy's hand and slid her arms around his neck, leaning into the kiss. She loved Luffy and he loved her. He was her captain. That's right, she thought as Luffy wrapped his arms around her waist, holding her against him. My captain. The two lovebirds did not go unnoticed. Just about everyone, except Chopper, was looking on and smiling at the pair. Even Sanji, who had begrudgingly accepted their feelings for one another, was smiling. He loved Nami the same way he loved every woman he met. But he respected Luffy enough to deal with losing her to him. He wasn't happy, but he still had Robin to swoon over. They knew that the pair had been in love for some time and they were all used to the occasional makeout session. After about a minute, Luffy broke the kiss and let go of Nami. Okay, I'm happy now, he said with a big grin. Nami's arms slid down from Luffy's neck and looked into his eyes. She returned his grin with her own smile. Good. I'm glad. She realized that her own face had turned red from his kiss. She didn't mind. She pretended to be annoyed. But that's all. You don't get any more kisses today. She turned around and walked away. You don't get to steal kisses for free whenever you want. Luffy chuckled. Sure, Nami, whatever you say, but I know you love it, he said, pulling his straw hat off of his head. Nami stopped walking and smiled. She did, and she knew it. Luffy could be incredibly sweet and romantic when he wanted to. But he didn't act like that all the time. That was fine with Nami. Frankly, if he was like that every time he saw her, she would never be able to get anything done. Most of the time, he treated her just like everyone else. Just a friend. And Nami loved that about him more than anything. Luffy's friendship was precious to her, almost as much as their romantic relationship. Above all else, she was the navigator of the ship. If she was distracted by flirting with Luffy all the time, it could be disastrous for the ship and its crew. She couldn't let that happen. However, when the ship wasn't moving, she could do whatever she wanted. Maybe I do, and maybe I don't, she said with a shy smirk on her face. I'm not telling you, Luffy laughed. That's fine. He extended his arm and planted his hat firmly on her head. You don't have to. Nami turned around in time to see him flash her a large grin, and he jumped off the side of the ship, landing on shore. Her hand rose to the hat now placed on her head. Luffy's straw hat. His most precious possession. Nami knew that no one else in the crew was allowed to wear Luffy's iconic hat. Whenever he put it on her head, she made sure to flaunt it like it was the latest fashion accessory. She wasn't sure if anyone was jealous or not, but she did it anyway. Feeling that simple hat on her head made her feel so safe and happy. She walked back to the railing to watch Luffy harass Sanji. Sanji, I want meat. I am hungry, Luffy yelled as he ran towards the cook, who had begun picking up the pieces of his grill. Sanji glanced at Luffy. I would have it done already if someone hadn't dropped my grill, he yelled in Zoro's direction. What, you want to go again, eyebrows? Said Zoro as he drew one of his swords. I'll kick your ass as many times as you want. Bring it on. Just as the two were about to fight again, a voice floated. Sanji. Could you please get dinner started? Nami called in the sweetest voice possible. She was leaning over the railing where her and Luffy were before. I'm getting hungry. Sanji, now completely ignoring the growling swordsman, spun over to where his grill pieces were sitting. As you wish, Nami Swan, the cook said with hearts in his eyes. Oi, you two, he pointed at Brook and Usopp. Stop standing there and help me get this thing set back up. Nami can't wait forever. As the three men picked up the grill and began getting it ready, Luffy glanced up to the deck where Nami was still leaning. He smiled at her and she winked at him. Nami stood back up and walked out of his view. With a grin on his face, Luffy rushed over to find out how long he had to wait until dinner was ready. The crew decided to eat on top of the tallest rock they could find. Unfortunately, the top of the rock was not flat enough for the entire crew to sit comfortably. This problem was quickly fixed by Zoro, who cut off the top of the rock. The crew began setting up a picnic-style barbecue on the top of the recently sliced rock. Once everything was ready, they all went up to eat. To everyone's surprise, Luffy and Nami did not sit next to each other as they usually did. Instead, Luffy sat by Usopp, Frankie, Sanji and Chopper, listening to Usopp talk about fighting a giant rock monster that, when he killed it, became this small island. Nami, still sporting the straw hat, decided to let him have some guide time and took a seat by Robin and Zoro. As she sat down, she noticed Robin and Zoro looking at her with concerned looks on their faces. Nami decided to confront them. "What, am I not allowed to sit on this side of the table?" A sense of realization came over Nami and she got a sly grin on her face. She had suspected those two of having something, but she hadn't seen them together too often. Am I interrupting something?" Zoro's face turned red and he turned away to look in the opposite direction. Robin laughed. No, don't worry about that, Miss Navigator. I am more concerned about you." Zoro made a sound, still facing the other direction. "Yeah, shouldn't you be clinging to Luffy?" Nami spun around and punched Zoro in the back of the head. "Ouch, hey, that hurt." "I do not cling, jackass." Nami snapped. She turned back to Robin. "There's nothing to worry about. He's listening to Usopp. I figure I can't take up all of his time." Zoro made another noise. "Clingy," muttered Zoro quietly. Not quietly enough, as he was punched again by Nami. "Watch your mouth, Zoro. Next time I'll kick your ass off this rock and you can swim to the next island." "I am not clingy," she growled angrily. Her anger subsided as she felt the straw hat get pulled off of her head and she realized someone was standing next to her. "Clingy? Who's that? He sure has a funny name." Luffy chuckled as he plopped down next to Nami, straw hat in hand. Her face immediately turned red as she heard his voice. She hadn't expected Luffy to leave Usopp and the others guys to come sit with her. Seeing Nami's reaction, Robin quickly spoke up. "No one, Captain. It's a term for someone who spends too much time with someone else." Robin snickered as Nami shot her an annoyed glance. Luffy thought about this for a moment. "Oh, I see." Luffy placed his hat back on his head. "So Zoro is clingy to you?" Robin's face turned even redder than Zoro's and Nami laughed. Even Zoro had to laugh. "Hey, what's so funny?" Luffy asked, a bit annoyed. Nami snatched his hat back and set it back on her head. She grabbed Luffy's arm and pulled him closer to her. She laid her cheek on his shoulder with a big smile on her face. The innocence behind that question was absolutely adorable and she loved it. "Nothing, Luffy, never mind," Nami said with a giggle. Luffy still had a confused look on his face. "Nami," she lifted her head, looked up at him. "If that's what clingy means, am I clingy?" Nami got a slightly annoyed look on her face and sighed as he continued speaking. "I mean, I like to be near you a lot and I am just wondering if—" Nami stole Luffy's trick from earlier and cut him off mid-sentence with a short kiss. "Shush. No, you're not clingy," she smiled at him. "You're only clingy if I don't want you to be around and I love being around you." She laid her head back on his shoulder. "Now stop asking stupid questions like that." Luffy smiled and snatched his hat back from her again. He then laid his head on hers. After a few moments, Luffy had an idea. He stood up, much to Nami's disappointment. "Hey, what are you doing?" she asked, confused. "I have an idea, just trust me." She trusted him, so she didn't object. He scooped her up in his arms and walked over to the edge of the rock facing the setting sun. He sat her down gently and sat down next to her. Their legs hanging over the edge of the rock, Luffy took his original position with her head on his shoulder and his head on her head. The pair sat there watching the sunset together, completely ignoring the smiling glances of their friends. They sat there in silence for what seemed like hours. All of a sudden something large and metal pushed down on Luffy's head. Hey, what the? He looked up to see Frankie looking down at them. "Hey lovebirds," he said. "We should probably be heading back to the Sunny. Everything is put away and it's getting dark. Plus you're on watch tonight, Luffy." Nami and Luffy nodded and stood up, still holding hands. "Right, let's go," Luffy said as everyone started walking back to the Sunny. Luffy and Nami's hands never broke apart until they got back to the Sunny. Nami decided to steal one last kiss before she disappeared into the woman's dormitory. Luffy vowed to get her back in the morning and he wandered away. He walked out onto deck and jumped onto his favorite seat on top of the lion figurehead. It was his turn to keep watch while everyone else went to bed. He sat down on the lion head and listened to a commotion coming from the men's dormitory. He laughed as the sounds died down and very fell asleep. Silence enveloped the ship and Luffy leaned back to listen to the sound of waves breaking against the hull. The Navy scientist looked at the vial of light blue liquid in front of him. He turned to his colleague who was talking into the transponder snail. After a few moments of listening to the conversation, he watched his colleague hang up the receiver. "So this is it?" asked the first scientist. "Yeah. We just got our order from Navy headquarters. This is the stuff we need to test. A side effect of Dr. Vegapunk's most recent experiment," the second scientist said. The two men looked at the light blue liquid for a moment before the first scientist spoke up. "The doctor said he considers it a poison, a very dangerous poison. Apparently, when Fleet Admiral Akainu heard about this discovery, he wanted it mass-produced. But the doctor would only provide one vial of it." The first scientist picked up the vial and turned towards the second. "And the Fleet Admiral wants this tested right away," the second scientist nodded. "He wants it and its effect on live subjects donated immediately. Unfortunately, the doctor would not test it on live subjects. Something about being unethical and unstable. However, if this stuff does what Dr. Vegapunk said it would, then this will be a game-changing weapon in the battle against pirates with devil fruit powers. Even most the four emperors wouldn't be able to stand against this. In that case, we should begin the process immediately. Is our prisoner here from Impel Down?" the first scientist called to the guards by the door. "Yes, sir. He arrived this morning. We can bring him in whenever you want," the guard saluted. "Excellent." The second scientist snickered. "Then we can administer the poison whenever we wish." The first scientist nodded in agreement. The second scientist continued speaking. "We only have enough of the poison for one test. The Fleet Admiral has already chosen his first target. He already has ships out scouting trying to find it. He wants this stuff ready in 3 days. Ed, the first scientist. We don't even know if this stuff is stable." "Who's the target?" The second scientist gave an evil smirk. "Why, none other than a member of the infamous Straw Hat Pirates." It was well past midnight as Luffy stood on the deck of the Thousand Sunny near the figurehead. He had grown bored of the constant silence, decided that he was going to screw around with the mast for a while. He looked up at the horizontal pole of the mast that supported the sail. He had a plan to hang off the mast and bounce like a yo-yo. He stood at the bottom of the mast and pulled his fist back. He aimed carefully as to not damage the sail or hit the crow's nest. If he damaged anything, Frankie would kick his ass, and he didn't want that. He braced his feet and threw a punch straight into the sky. His arm sailed straight up and wrapped around the mast. "Gotcha," he said aloud. "All right, next." He pushed off of the deck with his feet and shot straight into the air. He sailed past the spot where his hand held onto the mast and flew into the sky. When his arm extended as far as it could, he braced himself. He knew that he had pushed off with too much strength, and he knew what was going to happen next. "Crap, this is going to hurt." As his arm retracted, he shot straight back down like a bullet. He watched as the deck came closer and closer and closed his eyes right before impact. He slammed into the deck with enough force to crack the atom wood floor. The crash he made as he hit echoed across the ship. He laid there among the broken wood for a few moments before sitting up and laughing. "Ah, crap. Frankie is going to be pissed." He laughed again and stood up to dust himself off. "Oh well. Maybe he won't notice." Luffy shrugged as he walked away from the broken floor. He hopped on one foot down the stairs past the doors to the dormitories and onto the grass lawn. He walked over to the railing of the ship and looked out over the vast sea. It was good that it was his turn to keep watch. He couldn't have slept if he tried. All he wanted to do was set sail. There were so many adventures waiting for him that he couldn't stand it. His mind wandered back through his past adventures with his friends. Eventually his mind stopped at his older brother Ace. Luffy closed his eyes as he thought about what had happened at Marineford. It had scarred him more than he would ever admit to his crew, but Ace would have kicked his ass if he knew that Luffy was letting his death slow him down. A large grin spread across his face. "Don't worry, Ace, I will keep my promise I made to you and Sabo." His mind drifted back to the three of them growing up. His grin grew larger as he thought about his brothers. He stood there for a few moments completely lost in thought. It didn't take him long for his thoughts to drift to Nami. He realized that the thought of her made him even happier than the thought of Ace and Sabo. He looked out over the water. Man, I wish Nami had decided to stay up with me for a while. Luffy huffed. Nami had been standing on the stairs watching Luffy for some time. She had been woken up by a loud crash above her, and it only took her a few seconds to realize what it was. She had walked outside and leaned on the railing that overlooked the grass lawn. Of course that idiot would break something. All he had to do was stay awake, and he can't even do that without causing collateral damage. She thought, taking in a breath of the cool night air. What the hell was he even doing to have broken the floor like that? She watched him hop down the stairs on one foot like a child, and she couldn't help but smile. She was surprised that he hadn't seen her. He had practically hopped right past her. She hadn't decided if she was going to follow him down or not. She would have loved Luffy's company for a while, but he would have eventually told her to go back to bed. It was obvious that he loved watch duty, especially when everyone else was asleep. Even before they had been separated, he had always volunteered for watch whenever he could. Nami guessed that this was because he could protect all of them while they slept. She had spent her fair share of nights out on watch with him. It always ended up with her falling asleep next to him and waking up the next morning with a hat on her head and an arm around her. Every time she woke up, he was there watching over her. They lived a life of constant danger, and they were always at risk. Nami knew as long as Luffy was standing, he would never let anything hurt her. She decided that despite how much she wanted to wake up in his arms again, she wouldn't bother him. Oddly enough, he seemed lost in thought, and that didn't happen often. I wonder if he is thinking about me, she whispered aloud. She stood against the railing for what seemed like hours watching Luffy. Nami decided that it was time to head back in and get some sleep. It was getting late. She pulled herself away from the railing and walked back into the women's dormitory. As she closed the door, she leaned against it. She stood there for a few seconds before standing up and walking to her bed. Suddenly a voice pierced the quiet darkness and scared Nami half to death. I didn't expect to see you back in here tonight, Miss Navigator. For some reason Robin's smooth tone gave Nami the impression that she was mocking her. Nami went to shake her head, but realized that it was a useless gesture in the pitch-black darkness of the room. You aren't going to stay outside with Luffy? No, don't get me wrong, I want to, but… Nami paused as she sat down on the edge of her bed and looked back to the door she had closed moments before. Robin spoke again before Nami could continue. You don't want to seem clingy? Now Nami knew Robin was picking on her. She scoffed. Yeah, right. I'm not clingy like you and your boyfriend. Nami couldn't see Robin, but she was willing to bet that comment had turned the older woman's face red. Anyway, no, it's just he's in his own little world out there and I don't want to bother him. Nami's eyes were beginning to adjust to the darkness and she could vaguely see the older woman sitting up in her bed. After a moment Robin giggled. For some reason, I don't think he would mind if you bothered him. Our captain is a very sociable person. I bet he would like the company, especially if that company was you. Robin's silhouette laid back down. Nami chose to do the same. No, not tonight, Nami said as she closed her eyes. We'll leave him alone. She had just started to fall back asleep when Robin's voice broke the silence once again. You know, he's not going to walk up here and carry you out of bed to sleep with him on deck. Nami felt her face burning a little. I know that, she snapped before rolling over and drifting off to sleep. As she laid there waiting for sleep to take her, a thought lingered in her mind. I wouldn't mind if he did. Luffy laid in the grass staring up into the sky. Thinking about his brothers had put into a sour mood, but that was nothing that thinking about Nami couldn't fix. He couldn't protect Ace or Sabo, but he would die before he let anything like that happen to any of his friends. That's why he had to leave them for 2 whole years. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, but it was worth it. Luffy lifted one hand into the air and made a fist. He was strong, but he still wanted to be stronger. His duel with Admiral Aokiji drifted into his mind and Luffy sighed. Too bad Ice Guy had to quit being a Marine. I would have liked to fight him again. Luffy smiled and leapt to his feet. Oh well, there are plenty of other really strong guys to fight here in the New World. As Luffy looked over the horizon again, something caught his eye. What's that? I don't think that was there before. He looked at the strange object in the distance. It didn't take him long to figure out what it was. It was a ship and it was heading straight for the Sunny. As the ship drew closer, Luffy could make out the iconic seagull and the large printed words on the sails. Crap, the Marines. He glanced over the dorms. He had to decide right now. Did he wake everyone up, or did he deal with this problem himself? It only took a few seconds for him to make his choice. He ran to the railing, the ship facing the AP. When he reached the railing, he saw 2 more ships flanking the first. They knew where the Sunny was. Luffy grabbed the railing and hopped backwards. I'm not going to let you damn Marines disturb my friends. They deserve their sleep. He hopped again and felt his back hit the railing opposite of his hands. Damn it, if they get too close, they will start firing at us. I have to stop them before they get that close. He stepped over the railing and braced his feet against the outer hull of the ship. Now, gum gum, he said aloud. He couldn't yell too loud for fear of waking everyone up. Using his feet, he pushed off of the hull with all of his strength, jumping away from the Sunny. His arms retracted, pulling him towards the first rail. He flew over the grass lawn and over the railing before rocketing towards the Marine ships. Rocket. The Marine ships were almost close enough to the Sunny to open fire. Luffy had to stop them before they had the chance. Luffy slammed into the deck of the lead ship, smashing through the first deck, reducing it to splinters and sending Marines flying in all directions. He stood up surrounded by debris and dazed Marines. They could have easily surrounded him, but he didn't care. At first the Marines didn't even notice that Luffy had landed on the ship. The entire crew was in a panic from having half of their ship destroyed. I don't have time for this, Luffy yelled as he stuck his thumb into his mouth. He bit down on it, piercing his skin. I gotta crush these guys before they know what hit him and move to the next ship. The Marines began to rally and prepared to engage Luffy. Too late. Third gear, Luffy shouted as he blew air into his thumb. His fist grew as large as a giant's and Luffy smiled. He forced the air into his body and then down into his foot. This is what happens when you try to mess with my crew. Luffy's now giant foot shot straight up into the air. Gum gum, giant axe, Luffy shouted as he brought his foot back down with all of his strength. His giant foot pulverized the already wounded ship. His foot broke through all of the decks and smashed through the bottom of the ship. Luffy pulled his foot back up quickly. Marines fell into the water screaming as others called for a retreat. Luffy tuned and found his next target. Luffy leapt towards the second ship. Unfortunately, the Marines on this ship were ready for him. As soon as Luffy was in the air, the Marines opened fire. Multiple bullets slammed into Luffy, but he laughed as every single shot bounced off his rubber body and was reflected back at the shooter. Your bullets will never hurt me, bastards, Luffy shouted as he brought his giant foot into the air again. This time he imbued his foot with his armament haki, turning it an evil-looking black. Marines screamed and scattered as Luffy's colossal foot moved above the ship. I won't let anyone near my crew, he screamed as his foot slammed into the second ship. The force of his attack plus the power of his haki broke the Marine ship in half. Men screamed as they fell into the water or were crushed by Luffy's foot. Luffy landed on the larger of the 2 broken pieces and released the air from third gear. Alright, one more to go, Luffy said as he knocked more Marines into the sea with a flurry of swift punches. He turned around to face the remaining ship. He jumped off the sinking ship in the direction of the final ship. He used the broken pieces of both ships to reach the third. As he approached the final ship, he realized that there were no more bullets flying through the air around him. Instead, the crew of the final ship was standing on the deck just watching Luffy. As Luffy got closer, he heard one of the Marines speak. There he is, men. Ready your rifles, Straw Hat Luffy. The Marine called. Luffy guessed that he was the captain of the ship. You may be immune to regular bullets, but let's see if you're immune to this. The captain aimed a pistol at Luffy and smiled. Luffy didn't give a damn what the captain was talking about. He had only one thing on his mind, sinking that ship. He saw the gunfire and he knew it was going to hit him. Luffy waited for the bullet to hit his body and get bounced like all the rest. Instead, Luffy felt a tearing pain as the bullet pierced his shoulder. Luffy howled in pain and looked at his shoulder. There, lodged in his skin, was a sharpened dart. It was metal and about an inch long. One end was sharpened into a razor-like point. These bullets wouldn't bounce off. It reminded him of the darts Don Krieg used in the East Blue years ago. Shit, that's bad, Luffy thought as he brought his fist back and imbued both of his hands with haki. If the Marines fired off a volley of those, he wasn't sure what would happen. He had to get off his next attack before they decided to shoot him again. He leapt into the air just in time for the Marine captain to shout, "All troops, fire at Straw Hat Luffy, send him falling into the sea." With that order, the Marines opened fire. Luffy couldn't wait any longer. Gum gum. Ack! Luffy was cut off mid-attack as several darts pierced his chest and arms. He felt several waves of pain flow through his body. "This is nothing, you bastards. You can't bring me down with darts. Now gum gum Gatling." Luffy screamed as he aimed punch after punch at the hull of the Marine ship. His hockey-infused fists broke through the hull with each hit, splintering the outer hull in seconds. He gritted his teeth as the darts kept hitting him, but he forced his arms to keep moving. Punch after punch slammed into the ship and Marines went flying in all directions. None of this deterred the Marine captain. "Don't stop, men, he will falter our shots long before he—" The captain was cut off as one of Luffy's attack hit him directly in the face. "Shut the hell up. You're not helping," Luffy shouted as he kept attacking the ship. With each attack, more and more of the ship exploded and fell into the water. Within seconds, the ship was reduced to rubble and the remaining Marines were swimming for their lives. Luffy landed on the largest piece of the ship remaining and watched the Marines swimming away. His breath was ragged and he knew he had taken a lot of damage. He looked down at his body. 13 darts stuck from his skin in different places, but that didn't include the shots that hadn't stuck. He had a lot of grazed shots and even more wounds where the dart had fallen out already. Each one had pierced pretty deep, and every wound was bleeding. Damn, that hurt. Stupid Marines. What the hell is with these darts anyway? Luffy reached up and grabbed one. Well, only one thing to do now. He pulled on the first dart, tearing it from his skin. As the dart separated from his skin, a trail of blood followed it. Following the trail was a wave of pain. Damn it, that hurt. He said as he tossed the dart and grabbed two more. Blood was starting to form a small puddle at his feet now. He sighed. "Well, this is going to sting, but I have to do this." Luffy gritted his teeth again as he pulled two darts from his skin, tossed them away and grabbed two more. He furiously began tearing the darts from his body, battling wave after wave of pain. After a few seconds, all of the darts were out of his skin and he sighed. Luffy looked around satisfied with his victory, so he decided it was time to get back to the Sunny. He grabbed the edge of the broken ship and jumped backwards away from the Sunny. He launched himself back towards the Sunny without a word. As Luffy landed on the deck of the Sunny, he realized that the sun was starting to come up. He listened closely, trying to determine if the short battle had woken anyone up. It didn't seem so. Luffy sighed happily. He had protected his crew from an ambush in the darkness of night and he was happy. He walked over the main mast, leaving a mauled trail of blood behind him. He sat down on the seat that was near the bottom of the mast. His whole body was sore from the darts and he was ashamed that he hadn't stayed in third gear to deal with the final ship. "Oh well, nothing I can do now. The others will." He sat there and rested his head against the cool wood of the mast. His head was spinning. He had felt like this before and he knew it was from blood loss. He put his hand to his head and held it there. "I'm fine," he thought with a smile. "Chopper will have me fixed up in no time." His thoughts faded to black as he fell forward and slammed into the deck of the ship with a soft thud. Nami woke up early. The sun had barely risen and the entire crew was asleep. She smiled as she stood up. Since Luffy never came to carry her out of her bed, she decided to go out onto the deck and meet him. As she approached the door, she listened carefully for the sounds of Luffy out on deck. Hearing nothing, she realized something. That nitwit probably fell asleep. It wouldn't be the first time he fell asleep on watch. Nami giggled as she opened the door. She stepped out onto the deck and took in a deep breath of the fresh morning air. She stretched and scanned the ship for any sign of Luffy. Her eyes wandered along the sides of the ship but saw nothing. Her eyes stopped when she saw what looked like a trail of something starting from the side of the ship and leading towards the mast next to her. She leaned over the rail and looked down, trying to figure out what Luffy had pulled onto the ship. Her heart frozen when she looked down and saw Luffy laying in a small puddle of his own blood next to the mast. Her eyes widened and she was frozen in place. What happened? She could barely make coherent thoughts as she gazed down upon his motionless body. Her heart jumped as Luffy let out a quiet cough. Luffy. The Navy scientists looked at each other as Admiral Akainu walked out of the room. He had the bottle of light blue poison clutched in his hand. Apparently, Straw Hat Luffy had destroyed 3 of the 4 ships sent to track him down. The 4th had lagged behind the others and was spared from his attack. The scouts didn't even know that they had found the Straw Hats before they came under attack. The fleet admiral was not happy with the outcome. He was ready to form another group of battleships to go and attack the Straw Hats. The first scientist waited until the fleet admiral was out of the lab and the door was closed before he shook his head. "I'm confused," the first scientist said. "He wants to disable one of the Straw Hats, but it's not the captain?" The second scientist nodded. "That's what he said." The second scientist shrugged. "It seems stupid to me. We only have enough of the poison for one attack and he's wasting it on one of the crew members?" The first turned around and answered as he walked away. "Oh well, the fleet admiral knows best. I'm not going to say anything, are you?" The second scientist shook his head before walking towards the exit himself. Fleet Admiral Akainu walked down the hall clenching the poison in his hand. As he stomped down the hallway, he was met by Admiral Kizaru. Kizaru was leaning against a wall, producing light with one of his fingers. The fleet admiral intended to stomp past the man, but Kizaru stopped him with a question. "Doesn't matter to me what you do, but you know you were wrong, right?" the man of light said as he extinguished his light. The fleet admiral stopped and stood there glaring out from under his hat. Kizaru took the silence as an opportunity to speak again. "Don't get me wrong, it's a good plan, but my problem is with your chosen target. The member of the crew you are targeting is not that great of a thief." The fleet admiral turned around. "The victim of this attack has the potential to be the most dangerous member of that crew. After speaking with your admirals, I believe all of our reports about them are wrong. There is no way that she could do what she does without a devil fruit." Akainu snapped. Kizaru chuckled. "Fleet Admiral, I have faced the crew myself. During my attack, the girl did nothing except scream and cry. She is not a threat and certainly does not have—" He was cut off by Akainu burning a hole in the wall with his magma. "Enough. There is no way a normal person can do what she does. Do you really expect me to believe she produces storm clouds and can control the weather with that staff? That's ridiculous." Akainu growled. Kizaru laughed, but before he could respond, Akainu began walking away. "She has the potential to be the most dangerous person on the crew. Clearly her bounty is a mistake. I will remove cat burglar Nami from the picture with this poison. After this poison enters her bloodstream, she won't be a threat anymore." Whatever. Kizaru shook his head and laughed. Without another word, he bathed his body in light and disappeared from the hallway. Nami jumped over the railing and landed on the grass lawn a few feet away from Luffy. She jumped over to him and cradled his head in her arms. There was a lot of blood and Luffy looked pale. Nami was frozen and had no idea what she should do. "Oh my god, Luffy," Nami said as tears rolled down her face. She hugged Luffy's head holding it against her chest. "What happened? What did you do?" Nami's tears rolled off of her face and splashed onto Luffy. He didn't look like the same man that she had seen the night before. A few members of the crew were already awake when Nami screamed. Frankie, Usopp, Zoro and Chopper came busting out of the men's dorm as soon as they heard her. Seeing their unconscious captain laying in a pool of his own blood, Chopper reacted immediately. "Frankie, Zoro, carry him to the infirmary quickly," Chopper said as he made his way to his office. The 2 men tried to comply, but Nami refused to let go of Luffy. She napped in the men as they tried to pick him up. Chopper stopped and looked at Nami. "Nami, Luffy's hurt. I need to treat him. If you don't let us take him, he could die." Nami obviously didn't want that. After a moment, Nami let go of Luffy and Frankie picked him up. As Frankie carried Luffy away, Zoro looked at her. He could clearly see the agony and terror on her face. He had to say something. "Nami, it will be okay. Chopper will take care of him." As the men walked towards the infirmary, Zoro called back, "You know he doesn't like it when you cry." Nami realized that her tears were pouring down her face. Zoro was right. Luffy wouldn't want to see her like this. As she watched the 2 men walking away with her captain, she decided that she didn't care and got up to follow them. As she stood up, a hand came down on her shoulder to stop her. Nami looked over to see Usopp holding her shoulder. "I don't think you should be in there right now. You will only be in Chopper's way," Usopp said gently. Nami blinked, not quite comprehending what Usopp had said. Her mind was spinning. All she wanted to do was follow them to the infirmary. Why wouldn't Usopp let her? Usopp saw that his words weren't getting through to her, so he tried again. "Take a few minutes and calm down. Chopper will let us know when it's okay to see him." By this time everyone else had woken up and had come out onto deck. Sanji, already smoking a cigarette, was kneeling by the pool of blood on the floor. "That's a lot of blood," he said as he took a long drag off his cigarette. "Something serious went down out here last night." Nami was ignoring everyone as she looked at the blood. She stepped back towards it and fell down to her knees next to the pool. She just couldn't figure out where it had all come from. As her hand reached out to touch the blood, another hand appeared and stopped her. "Whoa, Nami Swan, don't mess with that." Sanji had grabbed her hand just before it reached the puddle. "I don't think my dear sweet Nami needs to be out here right now. She's not thinking straight yet." He turned to find someone who could take her to another part of the ship. His eyes turned into hearts as he saw Robin walking down the stairs to join the others on deck. "Rob," she cut him off and went over to Nami. Robin looked at her. Nami's eyes were completely unfocused and she was breathing heavily. She appeared to be on the verge of a breakdown. She guessed that Nami didn't even know they were there. The only thing that Nami knew was that Luffy was right there and now he wasn't. Robin shooed Sanji away as she kneeled down to calm the younger woman. Sanji was a cocktail of emotions as he walked away. Damn the rudder idiot. He had to go and hurt himself just to make my Nami Swan worry about him. He thought angrily. What the hell is he thinking? As soon as he gets back up I'm gonna kick his ass all over again. Sanji's thoughts were broken by Usopp's voice. "Hey Sanji, I could use your help." Sanji looked up to see Usopp and Brook walking around the deck. "We need to find out what happened and see if we are still in danger." That was a good point. Whatever the idiot was thinking getting himself hurt, Luffy was strong. Not just any old enemy would have been able to hurt him that badly. Sanji walked towards the center of the lawn. "Alright. Let's look around for any evidence of a struggle. Whoever did this to Luffy didn't do it quietly." Sanji froze. Wait a second. He thought in horror. How is there a fight of that caliber going on out here and none of us heard it? I know I would have woken up if I heard people fighting so close to Nami and Robin. He glanced over to the women. They weren't on the deck. Robin and Nami were walking up the stairs to the kitchen. Nami looked a little better. She was a strong woman, but walking out to see your lover in a puddle of their own blood would have shaken anyone. The two women walked into the kitchen and closed the door behind them. "I'll run up there to make them something to eat before we continue," Sanji thought as he took a step towards the kitchen. He paused. On second thought, Nami probably wouldn't be hungry. Any further debate was interrupted by Brook. "Hey Sanji." Usopp. Sanji glanced over to see the skeleton pointing into the distance. "There's something over there. I don't remember it being there yesterday." Sanji walked over to the side of the ship where Brook was pointing. He was right. There was something in the distance. It looked like wood, but Sanji wasn't sure. He stretched his legs. "Alright. I'm jump over to take a look. I'll be back in a bit," Sanji said as he jumped into the air. Using his skywalk, he made his way over to the anomaly. Nami and Robin sat down at the bar in the kitchen. Robin looked at the younger woman. She was a mess. Clearly, she was still in shock from finding Luffy and she wasn't talking. After a few minutes of silence, Nami turned her head and looked at Robin. "Do we know what happened?" Nami said quietly as if she wasn't sure what she wanted to say. Robin shook her head. She was willing to answer any question Nami had if it meant she would actually communicate. "No, I'm sorry. The boys are looking around. I'm sure they will find something," Robin said gently. Nami closed her eyes and took a few deep breaths. She spoke again, sounding more like herself. "And Luffy, how's he doing?" she asked. She opened her eyes and Robin could see the fire of an enraged girlfriend in them. Nami was back. Robin shook her head again. "We won't know anything until the doctor comes back," Robin explained. Nami stood up. "Fine. I'm going to help them. Those morons don't know what they are looking for and I want to know what happened," Nami said forcefully. Robin could hear the fear buried under her strong words, but chose not to stop her. Nami was on a mission, and in this situation, she wasn't going to be stopped. As Nami walked towards the door, Robin took this opportunity to see if she had any useful information. "Nami, did you see anything while you were outside last night? Was anything out of the ordinary?" Nami stopped but didn't turn around. Neither woman made a sound for a few minutes. Robin was about to repeat her question when she heard the near-silent sound of tears hitting the floor. Nami was crying again, worse than before. No. Nami didn't speak again for a few seconds. Her hands went up to cover her face. Her knees gave out and she slumped to the floor crying again. As Robin got up to go over to her, Nami spoke again, her words constantly interrupted by fits of sobbing. "It's my fault. If I had stayed out there with him, maybe this wouldn't have happened." Robin hesitated halfway to Nami. "This shouldn't be happening, he shouldn't be dying. All he wanted was to protect us, but I wasn't there to protect him." Robin was at a loss for words and stood in silence. What have I done? It's my fault." Nami slammed her head down onto the wooden floor with a thud. Robin took a few steps towards the sobbing woman. "No, it isn't. I don't know what happened out there, but you are not to blame, do you hear me?" Robin sank down again, sobbing louder than before. Robin's face filled with worry and she went over to comfort Nami. As she approached the younger woman, Robin realized that Nami wasn't even listening to her anymore. There was no point in talking to her at the moment. The only thing Robin could do was to comfort her until she recovered. And she intended to do just that. As Sanji drew closer to the anomaly in the water, he realized that it was in fact wood. He landed on one of the larger pieces floating in the water. The wreckage bobbed up and down as he landed on it. "What the hell is all this?" Sanji thought as he walked over to the edge. He lit a cigarette and looked around, noting all of the debris. It sorta looks like the remains of ships. He saw something floating in the water. He bent over and picked it up. It was a hat. Sanji turned it over and looked at the front. He gasped and his cigarette fell out of his mouth. His blood ran cold as he read the word running across it. "Marines? When were the Marines here?" He spun around and looked at the Sunny in the distance. At this range their cannons wouldn't have had a chance to hit the Sunny, but they weren't too far from firing range. "What the hell is going on?" Sanji asked as looked at the hat. "There is no way Marines could have been here when we anchored. Someone would have noticed them." Sanji stopped and looked back to the Sunny. "Did they attack in the middle of the night? If they did, then Luffy." Sanji tossed the hat back into the water and jumped over to another piece of wood smaller than the first. He had to investigate further. Sanji could believe that Luffy destroyed the ships in the dead of night to protect the crew. He had been with Luffy for a long time and knew that that is something he would do. But Luffy's wounds bothered him. They were circles, like bullets. Bullets can't hurt Luffy, but what else could have made those wounds? He landed on the next piece. This piece was obviously part of a top deck. Part of the railing was still intact. Sanji looked around and saw something sitting against the railing. He walked over and picked it up. It was a standard marine rifle. Sanji turned it over in his hands and examined it. "No, there's something different about this rifle. It's heavier than a normal rifle. The barrel's too wide as well." He mumbled as he stood up and aimed at the wooden floor a few feet away. Sanji squeezed the trigger and fired the weapon. He noticed that it was louder than a normal rifle too. His gaze shifted to the projectile that was now embedded in the floor. His eyes widened. "That's no bullet." He threw the gun away and pulled the metal cylinder out of the wooden floor. Damn it, a sharpened dart. This would have pierced right through Luffy's rubber skin. He gripped the dart and turned back towards the Sunny. "I get it. I need to get back and tell the others." Sanji jumped into the air and Sky walked back to the Sunny. Sanji landed on the deck of the Sunny. "Hey Usopp, Brook. You need to take a look at this." The sniper and the skeleton ran over to where Sanji had landed. As the three converged on the grass, Chopper, Frankie and Zoro came walking out onto deck. First things first. Sanji wanted to know how Luffy was. They could deal with the dart afterwards. "Chopper?" Sanji asked. "How's he doing?" Zoro and Frankie walked down the steps and joined the others on deck. Chopper stood at the top of the steps and sighed. "He'll be okay." Chopper's answer was met with a sigh of relief. He has lost a large amount of blood, but he's been through worse. He's already awake asking for food. Zoro laughed. "So he's fine and we don't need to worry about that anymore." He pointed at Sanji without looking at him. The captain has requested food. Shouldn't eyebrows be cooking him something? Shut your mouth, mosshead. Sanji snapped, throwing a kick towards Zoro. At least I have been accomplishing something rather than standing around here like a dumbass. Everyone turned towards Sanji. Chopper's eyes lit up. Wait, do you mean that you found something? Chopper asked hopefully. Sanji nodded and squeezed the dart in his hand. He felt the dart slice into his thumb. Yeah, I did. I think I have figured out exactly what happened. But we should probably go get Robin and Nami first. They will want to hear this too. Frankie turned and walked towards the kitchen. I'll get him. But you better not say anything until I get back. I want to know why the hell the deck is broken, Frankie said as he walked up the steps. Sanji turned to Usopp and gave him a confused look. Usopp shrugged. He was just as confused as Sanji. Frankie poked his head into the kitchen. Hey Nami, Robin, we think we figured out what happened. We need you guys. Frankie stopped talking when he saw the two women walking towards the door. Nami's hair was covering her eyes, but Robin had a look of worry on her face. She spoke up first. Okay, we are coming, Robin said as the two approached the door. The trio walked out onto deck and down the stairs to listen to what Sanji had to say. Nami stood near the place where she had found Luffy earlier. Most of the blood had been cleaned up, but there was still a distinct red mark. Nami blamed herself for every drop of blood Luffy had lost last night. If only I had stayed out here with him. Nami was spaced out and tuned everyone out as they spoke to each other. After a few minutes of talking, Sanji spoke directly to Nami. Hey Nami Swan. Are you ready? Sanji's voice snapped Nami out of her own thoughts. She realized that everyone was looking at her. She nodded. Yes, I'm sorry, she said a bit distantly. Please tell us what you found. Sanji smiled and continued. Anyway, after examining the wreckage, it's obvious that at some point last night, our captain, Captain Nami thought bitterly without realizing it, saw the Marines approaching the ship and intercepted them. During that fight he engaged a group of Marines using these for bullets. Sanji held out his hand and opened his fingers. The dart lay menacingly in his open hand. The razor-sharp tip had cut into Sanji's thumb as he was holding it. A little bit of fresh blood was on his hand. Several gasps escaped from the crew as they looked at the dart. Nami's eyes widened and she squeezed her arm. She could only imagine being shot by one of those. Luffy, after everyone refocused on him, Sanji continued. The point is razor sharp and would have pierced right through Luffy's rubber skin. Chopper nodded. Yeah, that dart looks about the same size as the wounds on Luffy. He got hit by a lot of them. Nami looked away from the dart and scoffed. It doesn't matter. Luffy beat the Marines and protected all of us. It's over and done with. We shouldn't be worrying about that. Her words were met with several confused crew members. Nami walked away from the group and looked up at the clouds. She would have to worry about Luffy later. We need to leave, she said coldly. No one replied. It was the only obvious course of action. The Marines knew where they were. If they stayed, the Marines would not doubt regroup and be back again soon. The crew could have handled them, but with Luffy down for the count, it was best if they avoided conflicts for the moment. However, there was a problem with Nami's plan and everyone knew it. Frankie is the only one who said anything. There's only one problem. I won't let the Sunny leave without Luffy's word, Frankie said. He is the super captain and he decides when we leave and where we go. Frankie looked around. Can we really just leave without consulting him first? Nami ignored Frankie's words. She failed Luffy once. She wasn't going to sit around and wait for the Marines to return to finish him off. She turned to say something else, but her words were lost in a sea of emotion as a familiar voice cut through the air. The voice felt like velvet against Nami's overburdened nerves. Nami's right. We need to leave. Prep the sails and get ready to move. We are setting sail. Luffy was standing at the top of the stairs above the rest of the crew. The air staring at Luffy for several seconds before jumping into action. They began preparations to sail. Nami was the only one who remained by the mast. How long has he been there? She thought, staring off into the distance. I thought he was supposed to be in bed. She wanted to turn around and look at him. She wanted to jump up the stairs and kiss him, but how could she? How could she face Luffy knowing that her negligence had gotten him hurt? Her thoughts were quickly interrupted by someone standing next to her. Hey Nami? Are you in there? Luffy's innocent face was cocked off to the side as he stood staring at her. Seeing his head tilted to the side, Nami couldn't help but giggle. Seeing her smile, Luffy got a big grin across his face. "Ah, there you are." He laughed, leaned forward and kissed her on the cheek. "Oh, I'm an idiot," she thought, feeling her face turn red. "He doesn't care what happened. We are all okay, I'm okay. That's all he's worried about. He doesn't care how badly he got hurt." She looked him over. Luffy had bandages all over him and a few of them were turning red. He acted like he didn't notice the blood. But Nami noticed. "What the hell are you doing?" Nami snapped. Luffy literally jumped back as she yelled at him. "You're supposed to be resting. Get your ass back in there and lay down before I kick your ass myself." Luffy let out a childish moan. "But Nami, that's boring. I don't want to lie in bed all day." Nami stepped towards him and brought her fist down on the top of his head with a smile on her face. She was happy to know he was well enough to complain. Still, he needed to rest. He had lost way too much blood to be running around like an idiot already. "No buts. Upstairs. Bed. Now," Nami said, emphasizing each word. Luffy groaned again but jumped up to the top of the stairs when Nami pulled her fist back again. Fine, I'll go." He groaned again and turned to walk back to the infirmary. Nami watched him go. As he opened the door, she spoke up. "Oh, Luffy. Yeah? I'll be up in a little while. You better be in bed because you have a lot of explaining to do, mister." Luffy giggled at her words. "Yeah, fine." He walked in and closed the door behind him. Nami smiled as she felt a single tear of joy roll down her face. "That idiot. Thank goodness he's all right." She turned back to the crew who was just about ready to set sail. With their captain's orders, they were finally allowed to leave. Once the ship got moving and was out on the open water, she would go in to check on Luffy. The Sunny began sailing, heading towards their next adventure. Little did the young navigator know, their battle with the Marines was far from over and she was directly in the crosshairs of their next attack. Fleet Admiral Akainu had a plan. He had a target, he had a location. No doubt the Straw Hats were already on the move after last night's attack, but his attack ship was hot on their trail. He was only sending one ship, that's all he needed. All they had to do was get the poison into cat burglar Nami. Despite Admiral Kizaru's multiple objections, Akainu knew this was the best course of action. He had chosen the best marksman he could find to administer the poison using the same darts that they had used on Straw Hat Luffy. Unfortunately, Akainu had already forgotten the man's name. It didn't matter anyway. As long as he was able to complete his assigned mission, the rest didn't matter. Soon, the Marines would catch up to the Straw Hats, and when they did, they would pick them apart, piece by piece. Nami looked up at the sky. It was a beautiful day and she couldn't have been in a better mood. She was standing outside of the infirmary door. Luffy was resting and recovering from last night's attack and she could hear him snoring through the door. Knowing he was alright made her feel like a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She giggled as Luffy snored again and she walked away from the door. "I'll bug him later. He needs his rest," she thought as she headed for the stairs. As she climbed the stairs heading for the upper deck, a gust of wind blew past the Sunny. Nami stopped and watched as her orange-colored hair flowed in the wind. After a few seconds she continued her ascent. Nami walked over to her small tangerine orchard. She ran her hand over one of the orange fruits. These were more than just tangerines. They were a reminder of Nami's home. She smiled as she thought of her home so far away in the East Blue. Nami walked into the orchard. "I wonder if Luffy would want one of these," Nami said aloud as she ran her fingers across one of the tangerines. Normally, no one was allowed to touch Nami's precious tangerines. But she would gladly give Luffy a few to make him feel better, only a few though. Just as she was about to pick one off of the tree, a loud crash echoed across the ship. Nami walked over to the stairs to see what was going on. Sanji, Zoro and Frankie were standing near the front of the ship. Sanji was stuck in a hole in the deck and Zoro was laughing at him while Frankie was shouting at both of them. Nami had no idea what was going on and she really didn't care. She rolled her eyes and walked back to the tangerines. As she approached the trees she heard another crash followed by even more shouting and screaming. It sounded like Frankie was about to tear someone apart. She ignored the ruckus, began humming to herself. Seconds later an even louder crash was heard followed by what sounded like gunfire and screaming. Nami was getting pissed. Damn it, they are going to wake up Luffy. She stomped over to the stairs again and looked down at the deck. Frankie was rampaging after Zoro and Sanji, firing at them as he ran. Watching the guys running around causing such a racket was pissing her off even more. Finally she snapped. "You morons! Shut up the hell up!" Nami screamed. Everyone stopped and looked up at Nami. Her face was a fiery red and they all knew they were in trouble. "If you assholes wake up Luffy, I will personally come down there and kick all of you into the sea, got it?" "Yes ma'am," Zoro and Frankie said simultaneously. Sanji spun in a circle, moving closer to the bottom of the stairs. "Wow, Nami Swan," Sanji sung with hearts in his eyes. "You're so freaking SXY when you're pissed off," Nami sighed. Yeah, just please keep it down." The three agreed and went their separate ways. Nami rubbed her temples. I better go see if they woke him up." As she walked down the stairs towards the infirmary, she had a smile on her face. Secretly, she was happy to have an excuse to go in and see Luffy. As she approached the door, she stopped to listen. She couldn't hear his telltale snoring and that made her nervous. Before going in, she straightened her tank top and shorts. If he was awake, she wanted to look good for him. She opened the door and walked in, closing the door behind her. Sunlight flowed into the room from the windows and Nami could see Luffy stretched out on the bed sleeping peacefully. She smiled looking at him. Her smile faded a bit as she looked at the bandages that covered his injuries. She walked over to the bed and sat in the chair next to it. Nami thought about how scared she had been this morning when she found him in a puddle of his own blood. "Damn fool. Don't make me worry like that again," Nami said quietly as she stroked his jet black hair. She sat back in her chair and closed her eyes. She sat in the infirmary for a long time just wanting to be near him. Eventually she dozed off. Nami awoke sometime later and sat up. She looked at the window. It was sometime in the early afternoon. She realized that she was in the infirmary bed. She glanced to the chair where she had been sitting before and saw Luffy sitting in the chair sleeping. Nami smiled and her heart melted. "He's so damn sweet," she thought as she leaned forward and kissed him on the cheek. She stood up and stretched. She wasn't sure how long she had been asleep, but the others had to be getting suspicious by now. The two had been in this room alone for at least a few hours. She gently eased Luffy back into the bed and walked out of the infirmary. The sun was beginning to set. Nami decided to make a head count of the crew. She could see Usopp, Chopper and Brook over with Frankie talking about something. She could smell something cooking and knew Sanji was in the kitchen cooking dinner. She had taken Luffy food for lunch earlier, but he had been asleep, so she didn't stick around. As she looked around, she realized that Zoro and Robin were missing. She glanced up at the crow's nest and saw the hatch was open. As she watched, a thin arm popped out of the metal and closed the hatch. A mischievous little grin crawled across her face. "And I wonder what those two are doing." Nami giggled as she walked down the steps towards the kitchen. She walked into the kitchen and found Sanji busy doing something cooking-wise by the oven. She was going to have him cook something up for her to take up to Luffy, but then decided against it. She left the kitchen and looked back at the sky. The ship was as lively as ever, but there was something missing. Nami yawned. Despite her little nap earlier, she was pretty tired. "I think I'll head back up to the infirmary. I can snooze in the chair some more," she thought as she walked back up the stairs. She opened the door quietly and saw Luffy sitting on the bed rubbing his shoulder. He had removed almost all of his bandages. A smile crawled across her face as she walked in and closed the door to announce her presence. Luffy looked up and smiled. "Hey Nami, did you like your nap?" he asked with a big grin. "Yeah, I did. You idiot, and you're supposed to be in bed still," Nami said gently. Luffy shrugged and stretched his arm to grab his vest off the table across the room. He quickly put it on as if embarrassed to be shirtless around Nami. "I have seen him shirtless hundreds of times. It doesn't bother me," she thought. "Yeah, but that's boring. I want to go outside. I'm sick of being stuck in this room alone," Luffy said, pouting. Nami smiled and walked over to the chair next to the bed. "Okay, so how about I stay in here with you? Would that make you feel better about being stuck in here?" She knew the answer to that question as a larger grin appeared on Luffy's face. Nami smiled back. "Okay, I'll stay. But you have to be in bed lying down." Luffy sighed and crossed his arms. "Fine, But I want something too, he said suspiciously. As Nami was about to ask what he wanted, he leaned over and kissed her. As their lips touched, Nami's world melted away. There was nothing else in the world but the two of them. She felt his hand come up to her face and he laid his hand gently on her cheek. After a few seconds, Luffy broke off the kiss and laid back down on the bed. "Okay, I'm happy now," he said with a smile. Nami could feel her face burning a little bit. She smiled, kicking her feet up onto the bed to relax. "Now Luffy, what have I told you about stealing kisses?" she asked teasingly. "You can't go around stealing kisses whenever you want. It's rude." Luffy laughed. "Yeah right. You love it," he said confidently. His confidence aroused her curiosity. "Oh, and how do you know that?" Nami asked. "'Cause you never stop me," Luffy said bluntly. This made Nami laugh. Once her laughter faded, she decided to ask Luffy about last night. "Luffy," Nami said quietly. Luffy looked at her with his innocent black eyes. Looking at him now, it was hard to believe that he viciously destroyed 3 marine battleships. It was easy to forget how strong he really was. "What happened last night?" Luffy to one side, he looked confused. "What do you mean?" he asked as if he was confused. Nami grew annoyed. What do you mean, me mister?" "The marines from last night. Sanji found the debris," Nami said. She knew what had happened, but she just wanted to hear it from Luffy. Luffy shook his head and shrugged. "No idea what you're talking about." He lied. He was going to pretend that it didn't happen. He was still protecting them from the marines. Nami's annoyance grew into anger. She stood up ready to yell at him. She didn't need him to protect her from something that had already happened. That explained why he was so careful to not let Nami see him shirtless. He was trying to hide his wounds. Just as she was about to speak, Luffy stood up and put his hand over her mouth. "Please don't yell at me. I just wanted to protect everyone. I wanted to protect you. That's all you need to know. Everything else doesn't matter." He moved his hand away from her mouth and put his hands on her arms. Nami didn't know what to say next. She just stood there in silence. "Luffy," was all that she could manage. Luffy smiled and sat back down on the bed, letting go of her arms. He lay back on the bed and closed his eyes. After a few seconds, Nami sighed. "Alright, fine. I can live with that," she said as she sat down on the edge of the bed. Luffy smiled. "Good," he said triumphantly. He lifted his hand and placed it on Nami's back. He spoke up suddenly, breaking the silence. "Hey, I got a great idea." Nami looked over her shoulder at him. "Wah?" Her question was interrupted by Luffy grabbing her shoulders and pulling her further onto the bed with him. He pulled her up so that she was lying face to face with him. He laid his arm under Nami's shoulder and smiled at her. Nami felt her face burning again as she laid so close to Luffy. She ignored it and snuggled up against Luffy, letting him wrap his arms around her. He held her close against his body. He giggled. "How's this? Comfy?" he asked happily. Nami looked into Luffy's eyes. It was official. This was the best thing that could have happened today. She lifted her head and kissed him, locking their lips together in a short kiss. "Yeah," Nami said as she snuggled against Luffy again. She slipped her arms around him, hugged him. "This is just perfect." She laid there feeling the heat from his body against her. She felt so happy here next to him. She didn't care what else happened today. Nothing could ruin this. The pair lay together on the bed until Sanji called everyone for dinner. Nami lifted her head and looked at Luffy again. "Did you want to go get something to eat?" she asked him. He thought for a moment. She knew he had to be hungry. Nami sighed unhappily and let go of Luffy, trying to stand back up. As she tried, she realized that Luffy wasn't letting go. He shook his head. "Nah, not right now," he said. "I just want to lay here with you." Nami's heart melted again. His answer surprised her. She laid back down, wrapping her arms around him again. "He passed up dinner for me," she thought as she snuggled back up against Luffy. She smiled. "He's so damn cute." Her thoughts were broken by him talking again. "Besides, if I tried to leave, you would probably yell at me again." Luffy snickered. Nami jabbed him in the ribs with her finger. "Shush you. No one asked you," Nami said with just a little bit of attitude. She closed her eyes again, feeling the familiar heat from his body. They laid in silence, just enjoying being together. It wasn't long before they both fell asleep. This time they stayed there. The pair stayed sleeping together until early the next morning. The next morning Nami and Luffy were awoken by the sound of the door shutting. They both looked towards the door and saw Chopper standing in the middle of the room. He had an innocent little smile on his face. "Good morning, Luffy." "Good morning, Nami," Chopper said happily as he walked towards his desk. "I didn't wake you, did I?" Nami quickly let go of Luffy and jumped out of the bed to prevent Chopper from getting the wrong idea about what they were doing. Luffy looked at her with a hurt look on his face. She quickly put her finger to her lips telling Luffy to be quiet. Chopper grabbed few things off of his desk and turned around. "Well, Luffy, it looks like you're doing better. You slept most of yesterday, so you should be okay to leave the infirmary today." Luffy got a big smile on his face as he jumped out of the bed. Chopper reacted quickly. "But you still have to take it easy. Putting too much stress on your body could reopen your wounds. And then you are going to be stuck in here again." Chopper's calm demeanor made Nami nervous. He didn't seem too worried about Luffy's injuries. Maybe they weren't as severe as Nami thought. "Great, I'm starving," Luffy said as he ran towards the door. He was out the door and gone within seconds. Nami knew exactly where he was going. "Sanji, Sanji, 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 I am hungry. Make me food." Nami and Chopper chuckled hearing his voice echoing across the ship. Chopper walked over to the bed and began fixing it. "Hey Nami, could you do me a favor?" Chopper asked without turning to look at her. "Yeah," she answered. "Could you go and keep an eye on him? If he eats too much he will get fat. If he gets fat his rubber body will stretch and reopen his wounds." Chopper finished making the bed and turned around. "So could you make sure he doesn't do anything too stupid?" Nami threw a half-assed salute and walked towards the door. "Aye aye, Doctor Sir," Nami said laughing. "But you do know that impossible, right?" Chopper nodded. "Yeah, but I know you will do your best." Chopper's confidence in her abilities to keep Luffy from being Luffy made Nami's smile grow wider. She walked out onto the deck and took in a deep breath of the crisp morning air. It only took her a few seconds to realize that something was wrong. She couldn't hear Luffy anymore. She walked towards the kitchen and found everyone except her and Chopper eating breakfast. Luffy was sitting in his usual seat at the end of the table shoving food into the bottomless pit he called a mouth. There was no room to sit down by him, so she took a seat by Robin, who had been waving her over. She sat down and Robin passed her a plate of food. The older woman stared intently at Nami until she finally became uncomfortable. After a few moments of awkward silence Robin finally spoke. "Well?" Robin asked impatiently. "Well what?" Nami asked completely confused. "How is it?" Robin replied. Nami was even more confused. "How is what?" Nami asked. Immediately after she said it she knew the answer to her own question. "She's asking about my night with Luffy. She wants to know if we—" Nami's face turned bright red and she shook her head violently. No, nothing happened, I swear. We didn't do anything." Robin smiled, clearly unconvinced. "Really? The two of you spent half of the day closed up in a room together and nothing happened?" Robin asked accusingly. Nami nodded, trying to force the red from her face. "Yes, really. We just talked and slept." Robin raised her eyebrow. "We slept in the same bed fully clothed." Nami added with emphasis on the last two words. Robin giggled. "All right. Whatever you say, Miss Navigator." Robin was like a big sister to Nami, and like all big sisters, she couldn't keep her nose out of Nami's business when it came to her boyfriend. Nami was mostly okay with that. Especially since she had dirt on Robin and Zoro. She was just about to bring up them being in the crow's nest together when everyone heard Chopper shouting from deck. "Hey everyone! There's an island up ahead." They were about to arrive at a new island. This meant everyone had to get onto deck quickly. They were all getting out of their seats when a pair of hands shot across the room and grabbed the door. "Island!" Luffy shouted as he flew across the room, knocking everyone onto the floor. He was followed by several curses and angry shouts. Before anyone was able to get up, he was outside and on the lion figurehead looking straight ahead. A kitchen and everyone else walked out behind her. She looked straight ahead and, just as Chopper said, there was an island. The island wasn't very large, but it looked like it had a small city on its shore. "Perfect," Nami thought as everyone spoke around her. "We were just starting to run low on a few things too." She turned and headed towards the woman's dorm. "Well, I better get everyone their list of stuff to get. Hopefully we can restock quickly and, Her thoughts were interrupted by a loud shout from across deck. "Everyone look out!" Luffy screamed as he jumped from the lion's head. Sanji leapt at Nami and tackled her to the ground as the cannonballs slammed into the side of the ship. The entire crew was thrown to the ground as the ship heaved. Nami smacked her head off the stairs and was thrown into a confused daze. She wasn't sure what was going on. As she stood up, she could hear the sound of cannon fire. It only took her a few seconds to realize what was going on. The Marines had caught up with them. Nami struggled to get up as Zoro and Sanji jumped into the air attacking cannonballs before they could hit the ship. Frank was running to the helm, Chopper and Brook were panicking, and Usopp and Robin were staying back towards the middle of the ship. Nami could hear Luffy shouting at the Marines, but she couldn't make out what he was saying. As her head cleared, she was able to make an assessment of the situation. The Marine ship was close to them. It was right up alongside of them now. She had no idea how they had gotten so close without them noticing. She saw Marines jumping off of the ship and landing on the Sunny. It only took a few seconds before the Marines were infesting the ship. Dozens of Marines engaged the Straw Hats. The entire ship had become a battlefield. Nami looked around and saw everyone fighting. She stood up and pulled out her sorcery Kleem attack. This was no time to be weak. Her crewmates needed her. Second gear, Luffy shouted as he activated one of his favorite techniques. As soon as he increased his blood flow, Luffy felt his body straining and his wounds throbbing. "Damn it," Luffy thought as he gritted his teeth. "There's no way I can keep this up for very long." He looked around and took a quick head count of his crew. If he knew where everyone was, he could help them if they got in trouble. His eyes darted across the ship and he made a mental note of everyone's location. The last person he found was Nami, who was fighting off several Marines by the main mast. He knew that everyone was able to fend for themselves, but he was still worried about Nami. While looking at Nami, Luffy noticed a couple Marines were sneaking up behind her. He quickly looked to see who was closest to help her if they grabbed her. Sanji was pretty close, so she should be okay. But why would they sneak up on her? Luffy thought. Luffy often fought on pure instinct, and right now his instincts were telling him something was wrong. He looked at the Marine ship and saw someone else watching Nami. It only took a few seconds for Luffy to realize what was happening. "No, Nami, hold on," his head snapped to Sanji. "Sanji, we need to help Nami right now." Sanji nodded and leapt towards Nami. If Luffy was worried about something, he wasn't going to waste time asking questions. They only had a few seconds, they had to move quickly. "Gust sword," Nami shouted as she sent a dozen Marines flying off of the ship and into the water. It didn't make much of a difference. Everyone was isolated and the Marines just kept coming. She could hear Luffy shouting attacks somewhere towards the other end of the Sunny. Luffy shouldn't be fighting like this. Nami thought bleakly as she brought a bolt of lightning down on another group of Marines. Even if these guys are weak, he shouldn't be exerting himself like this. She was so concerned with Luffy that she didn't see the two Marines sneaking up behind her. "Grab her now," one of the Marines shouted as they pounced on Nami. She screamed as the two men grabbed her and restrained her. One wrestled her sorcery Kleem attack away from her and threw it out of her reach. Nami fought back as hard as she could, but they were physically more powerful than her. They restrained her and held her hands behind her back. "Sniper, fire," one of the Marines shouted. "What? Aren't they already firing?" Nami thought as she struggled against her captors. She looked up and saw a Marine with a strangely long rifle aiming at her from the Marine ship. The barrel was at least half again as long as a normal rifle. "They're going to execute me," she realized in horror. She opened her mouth to scream, but nothing came out. She watched in horror as the man carefully aimed his rifle at her. He was just about to fire when Nami heard a familiar voice. "Get your filthy hands off of my Nami Swan, you pigs!" Sanji launched kicks into both Marines who were holding Nami in place. He seemed to have appeared out of nowhere to save her. She was about to thank him when she heard it. Someone else was screaming at her. "Nami!" Luffy screamed as he appeared in front of her, facing towards her. He was still in second gear. Just as he appeared, a loud bang resounded across the sea. It sounded like a rifle, but it was so much deeper. Instantly she remembered the man with the long rifle. Luffy's eyes suddenly widened and his skin turned back to its normal color as he fell out of second gear. Nami looked into his eyes. They were unfocused and quivering. Luffy's body began shivering. One of the Marines that had attacked her began shouting, "Son of a bitch! The damned sniper hit the captain instead. Abort mission, everyone fall back." As if on cue, all of the Marines turned and ran back to their ship. Nami was confused, but she had to make sure Luffy was okay first. She looked up at him still standing over her. "Luffy, are you okay? What happened?" Nami asked, still sitting on the ground. She looked around and saw all of the Marines retreating back to their ship. The Marines scurried back up to their ship and tried to pull away. Zoro and Sanji took off and jumped onto their ship after them. Nami knew they could handle it and returned her attention to Luffy. She looked at him again and gasped in shock. His pupils were gone. His eyes had turned a milky white. "Luffy!" Nami screamed as Robin and Usopp ran over. Usopp shouted for Chopper as Robin looked at Luffy. Robin gasped. "Wait, isn't that one of the darts the Marines used on him the other night?" Sure enough, there sticking out of Luffy's back was a long thin dart. As she looked at it, Nami realized that it was different from the first ones. It was longer and it was a deep purple color. Everything became eerily silent for a few seconds. Then Luffy fell backwards and slammed into the deck. "Luffy!" Nami shouted again. Her shout was drowned out as Luffy began to scream. It wasn't a normal scream of pain. It was a truly blood-curdling scream that sounded like Luffy was in pure agony. Nami watched helplessly as Luffy suffered right in front of her. She tried calling to him, but it did nothing. Chopper ran over and tried to help him, but as soon as Chopper touched him, Luffy got worse. His whole body began convulsing violently as if he was having a terrible seizure. Chopper fell back shocked and Nami broke down into tears as she watched Luffy convulse on the ground. She looked at Chopper. "Chopper, please!" Nami screamed, tears rolling down her face. "Do something. Anything." Chopper shook his head as tears rolled down his face as well. I can't," Chopper shouted over Luffy's screams. "His symptoms are escalating too rapidly. I can't stop this." Nami looked back to her fallen captain. "Luffy?" Nami said, her voice quivering as she watched the horrifying scene in front of her. If Chopper couldn't help him, then who could? She reached out to him, but just as she was about to touch him, Robin grabbed her hand. As she opened her mouth to object, Luffy's scream got even louder and blood began running out of his eyes and mouth. Nami's eyes widened in terror and she fell back tears streaked. What the hell is happening? She watched in horror and she realized no one could help him now. Usopp kicked in the door to the infirmary, making sure that Chopper and Franky had a clear path into the room. Chopper ran into the room and was quickly followed by Franky, who was carrying the unconscious Luffy. Luffy's convulsions had stopped, but he unresponsive and he was still bleeding. His convulsions had reopened most of his wounds from the previous Marine attack. Chopper ran over to his desk. His mind was racing. He had no idea what was happening to Luffy and that scared him. His symptoms were similar to a few diseases he could name off the top of his head, but Luffy's symptoms were escalating too quickly to be anything natural. Chopper stopped and took a deep breath, trying to calm his mind. So it isn't anything natural. Then it has to be some kind of poison, he thought, keeping his panicky nature in check. That was very bad. If it was poison, Chopper had no way to counter it without a sample of unused toxin. And he was pretty sure the Marines weren't sharing. Franky set Luffy down on the bed and turned to look at Chopper. Chopper had to make some quick decisions right now. He didn't know how long Luffy had. "Listen," Chopper said with as much authority as he could muster. "I need both of you out of here right now." Usopp and Franky hesitated. "But Chopper," Usopp pleaded. "Couldn't you use our help? I mean, we don't know as much as you, but we could still help, you know?" Chopper sighed and put his hooves on the desk. "No," Chopper said forcefully. "Everything I'm observing points to some kind of poison, and unless you have a vial of the original poison, then there's nothing you can do to help me." Franky gasped and jumped forward, his eyes beginning to water. "Poison? Are you freaking serious?" He looked at Luffy. "I know he's super tough, but even Luffy can die from poison, right?" Chopper shook his head as he put a cold wet towel on Luffy's head and began wiping away the blood on his face. "Maybe. I don't know. Luffy told me that after we got separated, he went to Impel Down and fought Magellan, a man who had the power of a venom devil fruit. After being exposed to a large amount of the poison, Luffy received some strange treatment that may have increased his natural resistance to poison. He said that he was brought back from the brink of death. Chopper shuddered. If that's true, then Luffy would be nearly resistant to even the most lethal poison. Meaning this could be anything. Anything from a minor poison to a fatal toxin. Judging from the excessive bleeding, I'd hypothesize that this was meant to be a fatal attack. Frankie nodded, wiping his eyes. You mean an assassination attempt? Frankie asked. Usopp squealed and fell to the floor dramatically. Chopper nodded as he walked over to his bookcase. Right. I'm guessing the only reason he is not dead is due to his increased natural resistance. Chopper explained as he grabbed a few bottles of different colored liquids off of a shelf and ran back over to his desk. Long story short, I have no idea how to cure Luffy. Yet, the best thing I can do is support his own immune system and try to find something that can counter whatever is flowing through him. Frankie nodded. I get it. So what you're saying is we are only going to be in your way? He asked, already knowing the answer to his own question. He scooped up Usopp and walked towards the door. That's fair. But I doubt that will be enough for Nami. I'll try to keep her away from here if she becomes a problem. Chopper nodded and without another word shooed them out of his office. Once the door was closed, he sighed and began talking to himself. Luffy, I'm so sorry that I couldn't do anything to help you before. I froze up. A tear rolled down Chopper's face as he spoke to no one. I'm so sorry. I swear that I will find a way to help you now. You are always there to help us if we are in trouble. Now let me help you, Chopper mumbled. He swore to himself and to Luffy that he wouldn't let his captain die from whatever this was. Nami was a complete wreck. She had passed out from the shock of seeing what had happened to Luffy. Robin and Brooke had taken her to the women's dorm and had placed her in her bed to rest. She was now awake and just lying there in the darkness of her room, a river of tears flowing down her face. Luffy. She mumbled for the 10th time since she had woken up. She had struggled to stand a few times, but her body wasn't cooperating. Her arms and legs felt like the bones had been ripped right out of her skin. Neither one could support her. After several failed attempts to stand, she gave up. She laid there, the painful memory of her boyfriend convulsing in pain in front of her fresh in her mind. She couldn't focus on anything except Luffy's face as blood flowed from his eyes and mouth. She shuddered in her bed. Time passed, but she didn't bother keeping track of it. She could feel the puddle of tears forming around her head. She didn't care. As she laid there lost in her own mind, she became aware that her throat was sore. She realized that she had been screaming. Her mouth was dry, she could feel pain crawling down her throat. Nami made a conscious effort to stop and try to calm down. That idea didn't last long as Luffy's pained expression slipped back into her mind. Within seconds, she was thrashing at her bed, screaming his name again. She clawed and tore at her blanket as she forced her body to obey her. She was going to stand and she was going to him. After a few minutes of struggling, she found herself standing next to her bed. She shook her head, trying to stop the tears from flowing down her face. I need to be strong. I need to see him. Her thoughts were slow and foggy, but she was a determined woman. She readied herself and took the first step towards the closed door. Suddenly the door burst open and Robin was standing there with Zoro and Sanji flanking her on both sides. Robin stepped forward and looked at Nami. A worried expression crawled across the older woman's face. Sanji looked down and Zoro closed his eyes. Nami looked into Robin's eyes. Please, she pleaded. Let me see him. Robin shook her head. You know I can't. Chopper is. Robin was cut off by Sanji, who stepped in front of her. He took his cigarette out of his mouth and held it in his hand. Nami, I'm sorry, but you're not going anywhere, Sanji said calmly. You're way too emotionally drained right now. You need to stay in bed. Frankly, I'm surprised you were able to stand at all. Nami realized that her breathing was labored as she stood in the middle of the room. She glared at Sanji. No, she snapped. Saying that one word with that much force made her dizzy. They were right. She wasn't going to be able to make it out of her room, let alone across the ship. Her body was exhausted, mentally and emotionally. However, at this moment she didn't give a fuck and they were going to get out of her way. You can't. I need to see if he's okay. Please. Sanji bit his lower lip. He looked like he was about to give in to her request. He looked away from Nami's weakened form and his gaze fell to the floor. He was about to speak when Zoro cleared his throat. The sudden sound from the swordsman was enough to bring Sanji back to his senses. This was for her own good. He took a deep breath and looked at Nami again. "Nami dearest, you can barely stand. If you tried to leave now you would only end up hurting yourself," Sanji said gently as he took a step towards her. Robin stepped to the opposite side of Nami. Nami stood there looking back and forth at both of them. Robin spoke up. "And if that happened, what would that do to Luffy?" Nami's eyes widened and she gasped. "If he found out that you hurt yourself trying to make sure he was okay." Robin stopped speaking and Sanji continued for her. "It would hurt him more than whatever is happening to him right now. You know him better than anyone else on this crew. He loves you. Seeing you hurt would damage his heart, not just his body. You know how strong his body is." Sanji stopped speaking. His arms went limp AOWN. He stared straight at the floor as if his heart had been broken. He began mumbling to himself. "She probably does know how strong that bastard's body is," he mumbled, his perverted mind wandering to places that were entirely inappropriate for this situation. Robin looked over at him and shook her head. "The point is," she said, ignoring the suddenly depressed cook, "you aren't going anywhere. You need to stay in bed." Nami was just about to say something else when a black sheath came from behind Robin and Sanji and struck Nami right in the middle of her head. The blow was strong enough to knock Nami back onto her bed and immediately lose consciousness. Robin gasped and spun around quickly. Zoro stood there behind them with one of his sheathed swords pointing straight forward. Robin was stunned. She never believed that Zoro would hit Nami, but she couldn't argue that his action had been effective. She was just about to object to his action when Sanji spun around and launched a strong kick into Zoro's stomach. Zoro coughed as he was sent flying across the room and out the door. He only stopped when he slammed into one of the masts. Sanji flew out the door after him and brought his foot down on the swordsman's neck, sending him plummeting down onto the deck. Before Zoro could react, the cook then jumped off of the air and slammed his foot into Zoro's stomach again, causing him to cough up a bit of blood. Sanji was furious. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Sanji screamed at the top of his lungs. "How dare you hit Nami like that? You had no right to hurt her like that. I am going to kill you." Just as he was about to bring his foot down on Zoro again, hands appeared from his body and stopped him. He looked over to the door they had just come out of and saw Robin standing there, her arms crossing her chest in her signature pose. She was angrier than Sanji was. "That's enough, both of you," she said, her voice filled with authority. Under that authoritative tone was the slightest hint of worry. "Enough has happened already. We don't need you two trying to rip each other's throats out." Sanji immediately complied and stepped away from Zoro. He put his cigarette back into his mouth and lit it. He took a long drag from it as he watched Robin walk down from the closed door and over to them. "Robin dear, please tell me that you agree with me." This insensitive moss head just blatantly hit her. He was completely out of line. Robin sighed and folded her arms. True, his methods were barbaric, but you have to admit, she is resting now. I don't like it, but I think Zoro was right. Sanji cried out and looked away as if his heart had been broken. Again. Robin looked down at Zoro and winked at him before helping him up. She smiled at him. "You know, I didn't expect you to let him attack you like that. I figured you would have fought back." Zoro shrugged. "Yeah, but if I had done that, it would have been harder to get him out of the room." Robin was shocked by his cleverly simple plan. This way, he already outside, she's sleeping and now all we have to do is wait for news about Luffy. Robin nodded, stepped forward and kissed Zoro. The kiss was rewarded with a suddenly red swordsman and a loud cry from a distressed cook who was now rolling across the deck. Robin smiled and turned around to see Frankie walking down from the helm. He laughed at Sanji rolling around on the floor crying and walked over to Robin and Zoro. "Hope you guys don't mind, but I figured it would be best if we didn't stay out in open waters." Frankie motioned to the front of the ship. Robin looked over and saw that the Sunny was approaching the island they had spotted before. Brook and Usopp took the Mini Mary over to that island a while ago. There's a cove on the other side of the island. It's deep enough for the Sunny to anchor, so I figured it would be a super place to lie low for a while. Zoro regained his composure and walked up the stairs to the helm. "Good call. We can relax there and make a few runs into town. If Luffy is as bad as you said, Then Chopper might need some more doctor stuff from the town. Everyone agreed, ignoring Zoro and his foolish choice words. Hopefully, they could keep a low profile until Luffy was back on his feet. With their captain down for the count and their navigator a basket case, the Straw Hat Pirates weren't going anywhere for the time being. It was well into the afternoon when Robin and Zoro returned to the cove. The pair had decided to walk into the town that the crew had seen earlier. Robin took a moment to examine their temporary home. The cove was the perfect place to hide. The cove was a large lake set inside the island about half a mile away the sea. It connected to the sea by a river that flowed into the lake from one opening and then flowed back out into the sea from another opening further down the coast. The whole cove was blocked by a thick wall of lush green trees. From where the crew had anchored, it was impossible to see the sea through the trees. The only gaps in the trees were the mouths that the water came in. The shore was covered in extremely soft sand that ran the length of the entire cove. The tree line towards the center of the island was also thick with shrubs and trees, so they were protected on all sides. The crew had had an extremely rough morning and Robin thought it would be a good idea for everyone to relax. She, with a little help from Frankie, had handed out jobs for everyone to accomplish before sunset. She figured that the best thing for the crew to do at this point would be to keep their minds occupied. There had been no word on Luffy's condition yet and everyone was on edge. Chopper had emerged from the infirmary only once after they had dropped anchor. He demanded that no one was to enter the infirmary no matter what they heard from within. He then left and came back a half an hour later or so with a few bags of supplies he had bought in town. He spoke to no one when he dashed back into the infirmary and closed the door. Everyone was worried, but luckily Nami was still unconscious. Zoro may have been a bit too rough with her, but Robin couldn't deny that his method produced outstanding results. As she approached the ship, Robin could see the crew busy with the tasks that she had assigned. The first thing the crew noticed about the island was that it was cold. It wasn't a winter island, but the temperature was considerably lower than their rocky paradise a few days ago. It was Brooke and Frankie's job to deal with that. The pair was busy preparing a large bonfire for that evening. The bonfire had been Sanji's idea. He knew that Luffy and Nami loved them. The two of them could lose themselves for hours just sitting next to the fire in each other's arms. He figured that, if Luffy was able and if Chopper allowed it, they could bring him out for a few hours that night. Everyone loved the idea. Sanji was alone on the deck of the ship. His assigned duty had two parts. Firstly, if the need occurred, he had to keep Nami under control. Once she woke up, Robin figured that she would try to storm the infirmary. She also figured that Sanji would be the best choice to guard her. He could keep her back long enough for backup to get there and help him. Secondly, he offered to clean up the ship. The battle earlier that day had left the Sunny a mess. The deck was a mangled mess of discarded weapons and blood, so someone had to clean it up. Sanji volunteered for that task. Usopp was doing his own thing by the entrance to the cove. Robin wasn't entirely sure what he was doing, but he had said that it had something to do with keeping the Sunny hidden from the Navy. Usopp was a smart guy. If he thought it would help keep them safe, Robin wasn't going to argue. Robin had selected Zoro and herself to go into town. This was one of the most vital tasks the crew was faced with at the moment. They had to figure out what island this was and if the people were hostile towards pirates. As it turned out, the island they had landed on was called Cardioa. Cardioa had a bustling little town that shared the name. Ol City was the only inhabited part of the island. Robin had learned from the locals that no one ventured to the uninhabited parts of the island. Apparently the forest was sacred to the people's culture and no one was allowed to enter. This fact made the island seem like an even better place to hide for a few days. However, there was a small problem. Cardioa was the home of a decently sized Navy base. The people were all fiercely loyal to the Marines and their cause. Robin had learned that Cardioa was the hometown of one of the Marines' vice admirals. Robin and Zoro agreed that it was in everyone's best interest to not cause a ruckus while they were there. As the pair walked into the area that had been cleared for the bonfire, Robin began to have second thoughts about the fire. Frankie and Brooke waved at them as they came closer. "Hey Robin." "Zoro." The skeleton called. "How'd your venture into the city go? Did you learn anything important?" The skeleton focused his gaze on Robin. "More importantly, Robin, would you perhaps show me your panty?" Brooke was cut off by Frankie putting a hand in front of his face. "Hey there brother, chill," Frankie said laughing. "Let's hear what they found out about the island before you get your head caved in by Zoro." Robin laughed and explained everything that she had learned about the island and the Navy base. During the conversation, Usopp returned from whatever he was doing and sat to listen. Even Sanji had come to the railing to listen to what Robin had to say. After she finished explaining their situation, everyone was concerned. Frankie was the first to speak. "Well, that's not super," the cyborg said. "If this island is home to a Navy base." Frankie paused to turn and look at the bonfire. He pointed at the pile of wood he and Brooke had collected. "This is probably a really bad idea. A fire of that size will attract a lot of attention." Brooke slumped down to the ground. "Ah, does that mean we have to take it down? We worked really hard on this and I was really looking forward to performing for everyone during the fire." The musician sounded like he was on the verge of tears. Robin thought about it for a moment and then nodded her head. "It's probably for the best. We can't risk something like this so close to a Navy base. At least not until Luffy is back on his feet." Sanji leapt over the railing and landed a few feet away from the crew. He had a big smile on his face. "Well then Robin my sweet, we can still have the bonfire after Luffy and my sweet Nami wake up." He motioned towards the ship. "Weren't we planning on leaving as soon as they were up to it anyway? I don't see why we have to change our plans yet. We just can't do it tonight," everyone agreed. It was a great idea. A bonfire would be the perfect thing to raise everyone's spirits after their ordeal. Robin smiled and nodded. "All right. Then we have a party the night our brave captain and his queen wake up," she said. Everyone cheered and went back to work. Robin looked up to the deck of the Sunny. She hoped that that would be sooner rather than later. Nami was standing on the deck listening to the others talking down on the beach. She had woken up some time ago, but she still had difficulty standing up. Once she was steady on her feet, she tried to leave her room, only to find Sanji on deck standing guard and cleaning. She knew there was no way to sneak past him, so she waited. When he jumped off the side of the ship to go and talk to the others, Nami snuck out onto deck to listen to their conversation. She listened intently, taking in the full extent of their current situation. It wasn't good and she knew it, but the others seemed to have it under control. She staggered over to the stairs and sat down on the first step. She was still exhausted and her head was killing her. "Why does my head hurt so badly?" she thought as she rubbed her forehead. "I can't remember. I remember Sanji and Robin trying to stop me from leaving my room and then nothing." She turned sideways on the step so she could lean back against the railing. She sat there for a while just listening to the gentle sounds of the forest and ruckus the crew made while they were working. Nami was still worried about Luffy, but she noticed that Chopper wasn't with the crew. That meant he was still in the infirmary with Luffy. If she tried to go see him now, Chopper would probably throw her off the ship, so she decided it was best to leave her captain in the hands of the greatest doctor alive. She laid her head against the cool wood and closed her eyes. "Damn it, Luffy. I told you not to scare me like this again. You're such an inconsiderate ass sometimes," she mumbled with a smile. Her thoughts drifted back to their day on the rocks a few days ago. It felt like it had been so long ago, but Nami could still feel Luffy's arms around her. A single tear rolled down her face and she wished he would come running out onto deck to hold her again. Her thoughts were finally interrupted by a voice. "Nami Swan? What are you doing?" Nami opened an eye and saw Sanji climbing up onto deck. He was quickly followed by Robin and Zoro. As soon as she saw Zoro, her forehead began to ache again, but she wasn't sure why. "You're supposed to be resting," Sanji continued gently. Nami closed her eye and scoffed. "I am resting," she said with her usual attitude. "I am sick and tired of being cooped up in the room alone. Besides, you people can't function without me." She opened her eyes and motioned towards the sky with her hand. "I mean, look at this. It's freezing. You dimwits can't even choose a good island to hide at without me." Robin laughed. "Actually, it was my idea, Miss Navigator," she said calmly. It wasn't her idea, but if that would make Nami relax a bit, then Robin was willing to lie. Nami shrugged. "Oh, well, that's not so bad." She slowly stood up and walked over to the railing. She looked around the cove. "I mean, look at this place. It's a bit cold, but it's absolutely gorgeous. And it looks really safe. Only Robin could have picked an island that was this perfect to hide in." Robin walked over and stood next to Nami. Sanji and Zoro came closer to but still kept their distance. Sanji made sure to position himself between Nami and Zoro just in case. Robin laid her hand on Nami's shoulder. "See, we are fine. Why don't you go back to the room and rest?" Robin asked. Nami shook her head. "Oh," Robin said as a wicked grin crawled across her face. "Would you go if we brought Luffy in to keep you company for the night?" Her grin grew a bit larger as the younger woman's face turned red. Nami opened her mouth to speak but was cut off by Robin. Yeah, I know. Nothing happened." Robin walked towards the stairs to the woman's dorm pulling Nami by her arm. "Just so you know, I still don't believe you. Regardless, you still need to rest." When they reached the bottom of the stairs, Robin let go. Nami sighed and looked at Robin. "Okay. I promise I won't cause any more trouble." Nami walked past Robin and the guys towards the middle of the deck. "But I would rather be out here if that's okay," Nami asked. Robin nodded. "Fine. You can stay out here with us. But you have to change into something warmer." Nami looked down at her clothes. She was still dressed to impress Luffy. "Luffy's not going to see you right now and you are going to catch a cold." Nami was about to protest but chose not to. "Fine. I'll change." Nami pouted as she walked up the stairs and walked into the woman's dorm. Robin was satisfied. This was probably for the best anyway. If Nami was out here with the others, they all could keep an eye on her. A few minutes later, Nami came out of her dorm wearing warmer clothes and holding a blanket. She wrapped the blanket around herself as she walked down the stairs. She still wasn't quite steady on her feet, but she was getting better. As she walked down the stairs, she saw Brook playing a song for the rest of the crew. Sanji smiled as she walked down the stairs. "Ah, Nami Swan, you as beautiful and as perfect as a princess." He moaned as his eyes turned into hearts. Nami thanked Sanji. "Hey, do you think you could make us some dinner? I'm pretty hungry." Sanji took off towards the kitchen yelling something about Nami finally falling in love with him. She shook her head and walked over to listen to Brook playing his violin. As the sweet music wrapped itself around Nami, her thoughts returned to Luffy. She was still worried and she noticed that Chopper still wasn't on the deck with everyone else. She was so worried, but she knew there was nothing she could do to help him at this point. She pulled her blanket tighter and she let herself get lost in the sweet sounds of Brook's music. Chopper came walking out of the infirmary. The setting sun hid his darkened features from the rest of the crew. He had no idea what to tell them. As he walked over to the railing, his presence was immediately noticed by everyone on deck. Sanji was standing by the bottom of the stairs and he looked up at the reindeer with a smile on his face. "There's our doctor," he exclaimed as he looked over to Nami, who had finally calmed down enough to join everyone else on deck. She was huddled in a blanket to protect her from the cool air of the approaching night. As she looked up at Chopper, some light came back into her eyes. She stood up, letting the blanket slide off her shoulders and onto the ground. "Chopper?" Nami asked in a weak, shaky voice. How is he? Can I see him now?" As she spoke, her voice grew a little stronger. Hope had returned to her eyes. Hearing the hope in Nami's voice was too much for Chopper. Tears stung at his eyes as he tried to find words to say to the crew. Chopper held back as much of the tears as he could. After a few moments of silence, Nami grew nervous. "Chopper? What's wrong? How's Luffy?" Her question was met with more silence. Nami began to panic. She ran towards the stairs, but Sanji grabbed her before she could climb them. "Chopper? Why aren't you talking?" Nami immediately feared the worst. "Chopper, please tell me he's not dead. Please," Nami shouted. The reindeer shook his head and finally spoke. "No, he's alive." But Chopper's voice trailed off. Nami sighed in relief. Frankie spoke up for her. "But," Frankie asked. Chopper visibly flinched. "But Luffy has lived through the poison. He won't die from it, but there has been a serious side effect." Chopper couldn't hold back the tears any longer and began crying. He. Chopper was unable to finish his sentence between his sobs. Nami was now even more concerned than before. "Chopper, tell us please," Nami pleaded as she pushed by Sanji and ran up the stairs. Chopper quickly changed into his heavy point and blocked her from entering the room. Finally he screamed his answer at the top of his lungs. "Luffy isn't made of rubber anymore. The poison killed his devil fruit power." The entire crew stood in complete silence. It felt like time had come to a complete stop as the news of their captain sunk in. It was unbelievable. The fun-loving powerhouse that always stood as a beacon of hope and defiance had lost his power. The silence that had gripped the crew seemed to last forever. It was as if no one wanted time to continue. All they could do was stand there, staring at Chopper. After what seemed like an eternity, Zoro finally spoke up. "His devil fruit power is dead?" Zoro asked, still trying to comprehend his own words. "Chopper, is that even possible?" He broke his stunned stance and glanced over to Robin. Robin was standing near the swing under one of the trees. She had her hand over her mouth with a look of pure shock hanging heavily on her face. His gaze slowly drifted back to the doctor, still standing guard prepared to stop Nami if she tried to get into the infirmary. Chopper reverted back to his original form with a sigh, never taking his eyes off Nami. "I honestly don't know. That is the best way I can describe what has happened," the young reindeer said. "His powers, his rubber body, they are just gone. His skin reacts just as normal human skin, but he doesn't appear to be in any more pain." Chopper swallowed, trying to find more words. He was on the verge of a breakdown. It's like he never ate a devil fruit. Chopper finally broke down and tears poured from his face. He fell onto the floor crying. Clearly, he wasn't going to be able to give them any more information. The Sunny was silent save for the sounds of the crying doctor. It was as if the ship itself was shocked into a stunned silence. Sanji closed his eyes and tilted his head towards the floor. He felt his eyes stinging as tears welled up behind his eyelids. This was the first time he had cried for a man since the day he left the Bharati. As a single tear forced its way out of the cook's eye, he came to a horrifying realization. At the same time, Zoro, Frankie and Robin came to the same conclusion. They all realized that Nami wasn't making a sound. Sanji knew what was about to happen. He jumped and screamed at the same time. "Chopper, grab Nami." The doctor snapped his eyes open and saw it out of the corner of his eye. Nami had stood up and was staring at the door. A split second later, she dashed for the door. Chopper wasn't fast enough to stop her. Nami grabbed the handle of the door and threw it open. Leaping inside the door before it was even fully open, Chopper gasped. "No, she can't disturb him. I don't know what will happen if he wakes up right now." Chopper thought in a panic. The space between the door and the bed where Luffy was laying was only a few feet. They had less than a second to stop Nami. Sanji was already past him and was inside of the room. In one fluid movement, and without making a sound, he threw his arm around Nami's stomach and threw his other hand across her mouth and leapt back towards the door. Zoro was ready and closed the door as soon as the pair was out of the room. Frankie quickly stepped up next to Zoro and blocked the door from Nami's view. Sanji landed about halfway across the Sunny and let go of Nami. As she fell away from his grip, Sanji saw the tears in the air between them. He wasn't sure if they were his, or hers. It didn't matter. Nami fell backwards, and as she slammed into the deck only one word escaped her lips. She screamed it so loud that the birds around the cove scattered into the darkness of night. No one on the Sunny slept that night, except for Luffy and possibly Nami, who was lying silently on the grassy deck. The entire crew was just standing around the deck thinking in complete silence. Everyone was by themselves, trying to stay away from everyone else. Zoro, Luffy's first mate, stood by the figurehead, Luffy's favorite seat. He stared into the night sky thinking about every person Luffy had ever saved. Without his powers, so many people would be dead or worse. No one on this crew would be alive right now. Each and every one of them had been saved by Luffy in some way. He was a hero to all of them. Zoro had been with him the longest, so he knew that Luffy only relied on two things to protect people. He never relied on weapons or brains. Luffy relied on his heart and his devil fruit powers. That was what made Luffy strong. That is why Luffy was never scared. No matter what they faced, no matter who they fought, everyone knew they could count on Luffy to see them through. His devil fruit was his strength. His strength was their strength. Without his devil fruit, what would become of the Straw Hat Pirates? What would become of Luffy personally? The thought crossed Zoro's mind only for an instant, but it made his stomach turn. His body cramped and his mind went blank. Would Luffy try to kill himself? Would he turn himself into the Navy to end his own life? Zoro growled and violently shook his head. No, Luffy would never do that. With or without his powers, Luffy is too strong to ever consider that. Zoro was ashamed of himself for even allowing the thought to cross his mind. As he cursed himself, he realized that someone was speaking to him. At first, he didn't recognize the voice. It was a man's voice, but he had never heard it before. As Zoro regained his focus, he blinked and saw Sanji standing next the helm. He was calmly standing there with a cigarette stuck between his fingers. He was talking to Zoro. "Zoro, come on. The crew is having a meeting," Sanji said soberly. He turned and walked back down to the deck without another word. His sober demeanor surprised Zoro. No mosshead, idiot, or dumbass. No insults at all. Zoro could hardly believe his ears. Zoro quickly realized just how seriously the others were taking this. Were they thinking the same thing that he was? Zoro slowly made his way onto the deck as he followed the cook to the grass lawn. As he arrived, Frankie was the first to speak up. "Well guys," he said looking at every one of them, "we are in some super deep shit right now." He sighed and blinked. Zoro noticed that Frankie's eyes were red and wet. Clearly, he had been crying, a lot. It seemed that everyone had shed tears by this point. Frankie coughed before he continued. "Luffy's devil fruit powers are gone." He noticed that a few members of the crew flinched as he said that. Frankie shook his head. And pretending it's not true isn't going to make it go away. You all know what this means. Frankie closed his eyes before speaking again. "It means we are vulnerable. Without Luffy's strength clearing our way, we can't continue." Robin nodded but didn't say a word. After a few moments of silence, Frankie began speaking again. "So what are we going to do?" His words were cold and felt like daggers against the crew's souls. Sanji was the first to answer. "It's rather obvious, isn't it?" He took a long drag from his cigarette. "Luffy has a 400 million belly bounty on his head. If the Marines find out that he can't defend himself anymore, they will hound us day and night until we are all in custody. We are only left with one option." Brook ran forward and grabbed Sanji by the collar. "Don't say it," the skeleton said, his voice thick with anger. "Don't you dare suggest that we disband." Sanji raised his foot and shoved Brook back with a powerful kick that knocked him across the deck. "Calm down. I wasn't going to suggest that," Sanji said. Usopp sighed and unfolded his arms. "As much as I hate to admit it, Sanji, that might be a good idea." Everyone snapped their heads in Usopp's direction. He put his hand up defensively. Whoa, hang on, just hear me out. It might not be a terrible idea, at least for a while. I know none of us want to be separated again, but look at our options." He put up 2 fingers. 1. We keep going as if nothing has happened. Inevitably, we are going to come across some guy that none of us will be able to handle. Someone Luffy would have had to face. We won't be able to win and some of us could. Usopp's words trailed off and he closed his eyes. After a few seconds he continued. "That leaves us with our second optio said. The Marines will find out about this eventually. And then we are all screwed. We can't just—" Usopp was cut off by Brook. "No," the skeleton shouted. "The entire crew promised. We promised each other, and we promised Luffy that we would never separate again. I refuse to go back on my word." Brook drew his sword and pointed it towards the sky. "If I did, I would never be able to face Luffy again." Before he could continue, Frankie stepped forward. "Okay, let's be reasonable here." He pointed at Usopp. "That's out of the question for 3 reasons. 1. Exactly as Brook said. I refuse to leave Luffy now, especially in his condition. 2. Where are we all going to go? The Marines will hunt us down one by one. This time, they will be able to follow our trails away from this island. 3. How would we all get to wherever we plan on going?" He shook his head. "It's just not possible for us to split again." Usopp threw his hands up in the air. "Okay, fine. What's your brilliant idea then, huh? At least I'm trying. You aren't even helping, you're just shooting down my ideas," Usopp shouted. Frankie wouldn't back down. "Hey, someone has to keep a cool head around here. It obviously isn't going to be you," Frankie shouted as he took a step closer to Usopp. Before the two could escalate further, Sanji and Zoro stepped between them. Sanji looked at Frankie and then at Usopp. "That's enough, both of you. Shouting at each other is getting us nowhere," Frankie laughed. "Yeah, that means a lot from the guy who viciously kicked his own crewmate across the deck screaming at him earlier. You didn't seem to care about shouting when you were trying to kill Zoro. Sanji turned back and faced Frankie. Hey, that was completely different and you know it, Sanji said in his own defense. Frankie stepped closer as if he was ready to fight. If that was the case, Sanji would give him one. A quiet giggling broke the tension that had been growing among the crew for the last few minutes. The crew stopped and looked around trying to find the source of the noise. Robin was the first to figure it out. Over on the stairs leading up to the infirmary was Nami, sitting on the top step listening to the meeting. She had her elbow resting on her knee and head resting on her hand. As the crew noticed her presence, she spoke. You guys are all morons, you know that, she said. Robin and Sanji made their way over to the bottom of the steps. Nami at some point during the discussion had stood up, made her way to the stairs and climbed them without anyone noticing. Sanji and Robin walked over to the steps and looked up at the young woman. Sanji began climbing the stairs to get to her. Nami, are you okay? Do you feel up to moving around? His answer was met with an annoyed kick from the young woman that sent him bouncing back down the steps. I'm fine. She lifted her head to face the entire crew. I'm sick of all this crap. Listen to yourselves. You're all talking like our captain is dead. Her voice got louder as she spoke. Get this through your thick skulls. Luffy is alive. Do you honestly believe that Luffy would let you guys disband the crew or go into hiding? Screw that. He's going to be the king of the pirates. He won't let something like this stop him. And he sure as hell wouldn't want his crew fighting each other. Every single one of you should be ashamed for thinking this way. You guys need to row up and trust your captain. As she finished speaking, she walked up to the door to the infirmary. She walked up to the door and grabbed the handle. Before she opened it, she stopped and turned around. With a smile on her face, she addressed the crew one last time. Come on guys, you should be celebrating. Your captain is alive. Nami opened the door, walked in and gently closed it behind her. The crew made no noise after their navigator departed. Everyone stood there cursing themselves for their own foolishness. Finally, Robin spoke up. She's right. Robin turned and walked to the railing overlooking the cove. Luffy is alive and he's still our captain. Sanji walked over and stood next to her. He threw his arm around her shoulders. Yeah, he said as a smile crept across his face. He's too damn stubborn to let this slow him down, and if he won't stop, we won't stop. If he can't use his devil fruit powers anymore, then he will just have to learn a new way to fight. He lifted his foot and placed it on the railing of the ship. He has the size and physical strength to be one hell of a hand-to-hand specialist. Zoro laughed. Yeah right. He said as he walked over, drawing one of his swords. He stabbed the ground near Sanji's feet. If he does that, during combat he will instinctively revert back to trying to use his powers. He needs a whole new style of fighting. Zoro pulled his sword out of the ground and pointed it at Sanji. I'll teach him how to be a swordsman. He can practice with me and Brook. Sanji laughed and kicked Zoro's sword out of his face. You are out of your moss-covered skull. Before he could say another word, Frankie stepped in between them. Now calm down you two. Frankie flexed his arms and struck his signature pose. I think we all know that Luffy would want to become an ass-kicking super cyborg like me. Swords and kicks are fine. But cyborgs would crush both of them, and you both know it. Zoro, Sanji and Frankie began arguing and shouting at one another, trying to decide who would teach Luffy how to fight again. Brook stood up and wiped his eyes. He picked up his own sword and put it back into its sheath. The musician smiled at Usopp. Huh, isn't it interesting how quickly the mood changed? Just the thought of him still leading us has restored hope to everyone. It's quite inspirational. I am sorry that I snapped at you, Usopp. Please forgive me. Usopp nodded and Brook smiled. Well then, I think we will need some music before those three start fighting. He laughed as he ran over to the arguing men. Usopp agreed and ran over, yelling something about Luffy in ranged combat. Robin watched him run with a smile. Suddenly a thought occurred to Robin. She walked over to Chopper, not bothering to listen to what the others were doing. Chopper was sitting against the tree on deck. He hadn't participated in the meeting at all. Robin figured he was scared of what the crew would have ended up deciding. But Chopper had a strange look in his eye. Robin looked at him, trying to figure out what he was thinking. She knelt down next to him. Doctor, she asked, snapping him out of his stupor. She smiled at him. Oh, hi Robin. Chopper asked, still slightly distracted. You look like you lost in thought. she said smiling. You seem quite focused, Chopper nodded. Yeah, I was just thinking. He stopped talking but Robin didn't leave. She knelt there looking at the doctor, silently willing him to continue. After a brief moment Chopper spoke again. I spent a lot of time thinking and researching devil fruit in general. I learned a lot, but while I was reading I came up with a hypothesis. It might be my own way of trying to fix this whole situation, but I don't care. I like my idea. He stopped speaking again. Robin pushed further. And, what's your hypothesis? Chopper looked at Robin and sighed. Well, the exact way a devil fruit alters the human body is still a mystery, but the current theory is that the fruit become part of the person's mind. Since many people who eat devil fruit instinctively figure out how to use their powers, scientists believe that it integrates itself into the brain. If that is true, and the powers that are accompanied with eating a devil fruit are biologically part of the body, then it may heal just like any other injury. Chopper smiled at Robin. Robin was a bit shocked. She turned her head when she heard a loud splash and shouting. She ignored it and kept speaking. So, you think that, given time, Luffy's powers will return? Chopper nodded. Precisely. It's just a hypothesis and I don't have enough data to back it up or even prove it, but… Chopper shook his head. Luffy may heal, or one of them, he nodded Enki. Zoro was gone, but Robin could hear him shouting. It sounded like Zoro was shouting from the water next to the ship. We'll teach Luffy how to fight without them. Zoro climbed back onto the ship, his face red with anger. He leapt at Sanji, who quickly countered his blade. As the two focused on each other, Frankie came out of nowhere and shoved them both into the sea. Chopper chuckled and turned his attention away from them. Who knows, Luffy may be able to eat a new devil fruit now. Robin shook her head. Well, I guess we will find out soon, won't we? She stood up and turned to walk up the stairs to the helm. She was lost in thought. As she reached the top of the ship, she looked over to the tress and saw someone standing near the shore. Nami closed the door to the infirmary behind her. When the door closed she quickly put her back against it and listened. She wanted to make sure that no one was following her. After a few moments of silence, she was satisfied, stepped away from the door and smiled. She turned her head towards the bed. She didn't know what she expected him to look like, but she was surprised to see that Luffy looked exactly the same as he did when she saw him yesterday. As soon as she laid her eyes on him she felt better. The last few days had been an agonizing storm for her, but there had always been a beacon of light that made everything better. Luffy. She was so happy just to be able to see him. She walked towards the bed where he had spent the last day. She smiled. He looked so peaceful. Nami laid her hand on Luffy's cheek. She ran her fingers down his face and onto his arm. She then slid her fingers down to his hand and rested her hand on his. You had to be so bored, she said quietly. Nami looked around for the chair that she had used the last time she had been in here. She spotted it against the far wall. It was upside down. It had probably been in Chopper's way. She thought as she walked over to get it. She lifted it and propped it back up as quietly as she could. It wasn't that heavy, but she didn't want to disturb him. As she turned around to push the chair over to the bed she saw something that made her scream. Luffy was standing next to her. Nami fell backwards and hit her back against the wall. Luffy looked worried. Nami, you okay? He asked, kneeling down next to her. She was so surprised to see him standing that she couldn't respond. That didn't bother him at all. He just smiled. Oh, I must have scared ya. Sorry, he said, throwing her a toothy grin. He helped Nami to her feet and looked at the chair. I guess you wanted to take this. His sentence was cut off by Nami throwing herself at him. She wrapped her arms around him and knocked him to the floor. The two hit the wooden floor with a loud thud. Nami didn't care. She squeezed him as hard as she dared to. She didn't know how badly he hurt, but she still wanted to hug him. She squeezed him as tears of joy rolled down her face, but she didn't care about those either. Nami lifted her head to his and gave him a long, passionate kiss. Feeling her lips against his was like a drug to her. She never wanted it to stop. Suddenly, Luffy began coughing, forcing the passionate kiss to an end. She let him go and sat back on her knees, giving him enough room to cough. After a few coughs, Luffy looked up at her. Sorry about that, he said. She smiled at him. It's fine. I was about done anyway, she said as she stood up. Luffy had a sad look on his face. But I wasn't, he pouted. Nami smiled and rolled her eyes. She held out her hand to help Luffy up. Yeah, well, look what happened. You can't hold a kiss like that in your condition. You will have to wait until you're better, Nami scolded. He didn't act any different either. Was Chopper sure that about his diagnosis? Luffy sighed and took her outstretched hand. She pulled him to his feet and let go of his hand. Luffy pointed to the chair and Nami nodded. He picked up the chair and took it over to the bed for her. Luffy sat down on the bed and Nami sat down in the chair. So Luffy, Nami asked. She hesitated before she continued. Do you feel? Luffy shrugged and lay back onto the bed. I'm fine, he said nonchalantly. He giggled after he said it. That's a boring question. Let's talk about what you guys have been doing while I have been in bed. Luffy quickly sat up. As he sat up he winced a little in pain, but it quickly passed. You guys didn't kick anyone's ass without me, did you? Nami chuckled and looked down at the floor. Her hair covered her eyes as she spoke. No, we are hiding in a cove on the island Chopper saw before the attack. Nami said quietly. She was about fed up with Luffy. Her anger was growing with every word he spoke. Oh, Nah, that's boring. Luffy jumped out of bed and landed on his feet with another wince. This one lasted a bit longer than the last. There's a city, right? Let's go into the city. I want to do something fun. Nami bit her lower lip. That was all that she could take. She lost her temper. Luffy, enough, she screamed. Her sudden outburst shocked Luffy and he backed away from her. He looked confused but Nami didn't care. He knew exactly what she was angry about. Please just stop. Luffy tilted his head at her. Stop what? He asked. Nami clenched her fists as tears rolled down her eyes. This whole strong man charade. You are so badly hurt, and we all know it. Why do you have to keep pretending that you don't feel anything? Luffy turned to look away from Nami. I am amazed that you can stand at this point yet you are trying to run off into town and have an adventure. You're standing here in front of me claiming that you are completely fine. We both know you're not. You're in so much pain. Why can't you just tell me? Luffy walked over to the bed. His hat was sitting on a small table next to it. He picked it up and put it on her head. He stayed silent for a few moments. Because I am the captain, he said finally without looking at Nami. I have to be the strongest. I have to be the best. A crew needs to be able to trust their captain no matter what. If I am crying in pain, what kind of captain am I? He said with a dark tone. Nami was about to protest, but suddenly Luffy's expression changed and he looked down at his arm. He clenched and unclenched his fist a few times. Huh? He said quietly. Nami looked up at him. She wiped her tears out of her eyes. What's wrong? She asked, knowing the answer already. She figured that he would lie to her. Instead, his answer surprised her. I dunno, he said, rubbing his arm. My skin feels. Ichy. Nami gasped, throwing her hand over her mouth. Luffy? She asked him hesitantly. Have you? Did Chopper talk to you? Luffy shook his head. Nami tilted her head down again. He doesn't know. She thought in horror. He doesn't know about his powers being gone. She looked up at him, refusing to make eye contact. Luffy was confused. Nami, what's wrong? You're crying again. I don't like it when you cry, he said innocently. Nami put her finger to her mouth and bit it gently. She didn't know how to tell Luffy that he was just a regular person now. She had honestly hoped that Chopper would be the one to deal with that. She took her finger away from her mouth and looked at Luffy again. What she saw brought more tears to her eyes. Hey, what the hell is going on? Luffy demanded as he threw his arm forward. He's trying to stretch, Nami thought as her whole body quivered. Hey, this isn't funny. My arm isn't stretching. I'm made of rubber, I always stretch. He began examining the rest of his body. He pulled at his legs, his hands, his ears, and then he went to grab his face. Nami could take it. Every time he tried to stretch himself, he left red marks and scratches on his skin. As he reached up to pull his cheek out, Nami reached forward and grabbed his hands. Luffy, please stop, she pleaded, still refusing to look into his eyes. Nami, what's going on? Luffy stopped and looked around. He looked at the bed and at a floor. Is there a seat prism stone in here? No, wait, I'm not all warded, whining and asking his skin to stretch like it was supposed to. Nami sighed. She had to shut him up. She had to tell him. She reaches up and clamped her hand across Luffy's mouth. He stopped talking immediately. Luffy. She had his complete and undivided attention. It wasn't fair to keep him in the dark any longer. Luffy, you can't stretch anymore. Luffy tilted his head to the side in confusion, so Nami continued. The Marines. They tried to kill you, but instead they killed your devil fruit powers. Luffy blinked twice as if he didn't understand. Tears rolled down Nami's face. You aren't made of rubber. You have turned back into a normal person. Nami's voice grew louder and louder as she spoke. She kept talking, trying to burn his situation into his head any way she could. I'm sorry, Luffy, but you aren't made of rubber anymore.